Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel, I share real life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was driving back from my cousin Daniel's place in eastern Kentucky, taking one of those narrow county roads that twist between farms and patches of woods. It was early August, just past dusk, the kind of evening where the air hung heavy and warm, even with the windows cracked. I had another hour before I hit anything close to a main road, but I didn't mind. I'd taken that route 100 times. The sky still had a bit of orange left in it, fading slow behind the hills, and the fields on either side of the road were full of crickets. I remember that part clearly because the windows were down and the sound came in steady, a background noise that kept me relaxed. My car, an old Subaru I bought from a guy named Melvin in town, rattled a little on the rough patches, but it always did that. About 10 minutes after leaving Daniel's, I noticed something on the side of the road up ahead. I thought at first it was a mailbox or maybe someone's kid's bike leaning against a fence post. As I got closer, the shape sharpened into a person. That part didn't bother me at first. People walk those roads sometimes, but this one wasn't walking, just standing there on the narrow gravel shoulder. When I got close enough to make out the details, I saw it was a kid. Couldn't have been older than 10 or 11. Thin, pale, wearing a dark jacket even though it was still warm enough that I had sweat behind my knees. The kid had one arm stretched out, thumb raised like he was hitchhiking. But he wasn't moving at all. Not shifting his weight, not turning his head as I approached, nothing. I slowed down automatically. I didn't plan on picking anyone up, especially not a kid out alone, but I wasn't about to fly past without checking if he needed help. My headlights washed over him as I rolled to a crawl. His face didn't change, just blank, staring at the car like he'd been waiting specifically for me. I stopped a few feet ahead so I could talk through the passenger side window. I leaned across the seat and called out, "Hey, you all right? You need me to call someone?" The kid stepped forward and leaned down toward the open window in this strange, stiff way, like each movement had been rehearsed. His face was close enough now that I could see how smooth his skin was, like he hadn't spent more than a minute outside in his life. His eyes didn't catch the light the way normal eyes do. I didn't notice anything outright wrong with them at first. They just looked flat. He didn't blink. Not once. In this completely calm, quiet voice, he asked, "Have you seen our light?" I didn't even understand the question. I must have stared at him for a full second before answering. "Your light? What light?" He didn't react, didn't repeat himself, didn't move. I remember thinking that maybe he was lost or hurt or had wandered away from some campsite. Kids sometimes say weird things when they're scared. I was about to ask where his parents were when the entire road lit up with a flash so bright it wiped out every other color around us. Not like lightning. There was no buildup, no flicker, no sound, just pure white that erased everything. My hands jumped off the wheel. I heard myself gasp because the brightness punched straight through my eyes into the back of my skull. It felt closer than something in the sky should have been. It felt close enough to touch the roof of the car. It lasted maybe half a second, maybe a little more. Hard to judge. When it vanished, it did so instantly, like someone flipping a switch. I blinked hard, trying to get my vision to settle. My eyes watered. The world came back in pieces. First the road, then the outline of the trees, then the dashboard lights. The kid was gone. I didn't see him running away. I didn't hear footsteps on gravel. He just wasn't there anymore. I twisted in my seat and checked the mirrors, half expecting to see him standing behind the car or off in the ditch. Nothing. Both sides of the road were completely empty. No movement, no branches shaking, no dust kicked up from someone leaving quickly. Just the same quiet dusk like nothing had happened at all, except the crickets had stopped. I didn't notice that right away. It hit only when the silence pressed in hard around the car. No bugs, no birds, no wind. The kind of quiet that feels thick. I put the Subaru back in drive and crept forward, glancing at both sides of the road every few seconds. I told myself the kid had just run off when the flash scared him. That made sense. A bright light appears out of nowhere. Any kid would bolt. But the timing bothered me, and the way he'd leaned down, unmoving, and the question he'd asked. Have you seen our light? I drove another half-mile before sounds slowly came back. First a couple crickets, then more. The normal night noise returned in patches, like the woods were warming back up. By the time I hit a stretch of open field, I'd convinced myself to call someone. Maybe the sheriff's office. Maybe Daniel. Maybe nobody. I picked up my phone to check for service and saw the time. 8:42 p.m. I had left Daniel's at 8:11. The drive to that particular spot shouldn't have taken more than 15 minutes, 20 at the absolute most. I had slowed down, sure, and sat for a moment after the flash, but not 30 plus minutes worth. It didn't line up. I tried to brush it off as me misremembering when exactly I left, but I'd told Daniel I wanted to be home by 9. I remembered checking the time on his kitchen stove before heading out. I kept going, wanting to get home more than anything. The sky dimmed behind me. The hills faded to silhouettes. A couple times I thought I saw movement near the fences, shapes shifting just out of the corner of my eye, but each time I turned my head, nothing was there. About 15 minutes later, I passed a small pull-off by a soybean field and noticed a faint glow in the sky off to the east. It wasn't bright enough to be another flash, more like the reflection of distant headlights on low clouds, except there were no clouds. The sky had cleared completely, showing a handful of early stars. I drove faster. When I finally reached the turnoff to the old church road, I checked the time again, 8:49 p.m. Somehow everything after the flash had moved normally. It was just that strange gap around the moment it happened. I made it home at 9:13. I locked the door behind me, something I didn't usually do right away, and sat on the couch for a while, trying to settle down. I felt weirdly drained, like I'd driven a lot farther than I had. My hands were still a little shaky. The next morning, I drove the same route in full daylight. I stopped at the exact patch of shoulder where I remembered seeing the kid. Gravel looked disturbed, but not in any obvious way. Could have been from any car pulling over there. No footprints I could really make out, just small dents in dry soil that might have been from deer or maybe nothing useful at all. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. I stood there for a minute anyway, listening. No strange feelings, no weird silence, just the regular heat and cicadas. I left after that. Haven't taken that road at dusk again. Not because I think something's waiting there, but because I still don't understand what I saw. The kid. The question. The flash that came out of nowhere and left without a sound. I didn't see their light. Not before that moment anyway, and I haven't seen anything like it since. I pulled into the rest stop because my eyes were starting to blur, that gritty feeling that hits after too many hours staring at highway lines. It was somewhere in northern Idaho, maybe 40 miles past Bonner's Ferry. I'd been hauling a load of lumber up toward Kalispell and planned to sleep a couple hours before pushing through the last stretch. It was close to 2 a.m., the kind of hour when even the radio feels too loud. The place was empty. No cars, no other semis, not even a stray pickup. Just 2 long rows of parking spots, a bathroom building, and a flickering security light near the vending machines. The air had this damp chill to it, not quite cold, but enough that I could see the faintest bit of fog hugging the ground. The whole rest stop felt like it had been forgotten. I parked under one of the working lights and killed the engine. The sudden quiet made my ears ring. Usually I like that moment. No engine, no CB chatter, just stillness. But something about that night made it feel heavier than usual. I tried shaking it off. I was tired. That's all. I climbed into the sleeper to change my shirt and stretch my back. I'd barely gotten my boots off when I heard something outside. Not footsteps, more like faint tapping on metal. I sat still for a moment, listening. Nothing. No wind, no cars on the highway, nothing moving. I figured maybe the cooling engine made a sound and went back to unrolling my sleeping bag. But then I felt it again. This sense of being watched. It sounds dramatic, but it wasn't some big gut punch or anything. It was just this tiny shift in the air, like the silence had weight to it. I peeked out the side curtain. There was someone standing near the vending machines. A kid. Small, maybe 8 or 9. Too small to be out there alone at that hour. They were just staring at my truck. Not moving, not fidgeting, just this little silhouette under the flickering light. I slid back into the driver's seat to get a better look without opening the door. The kid was wearing a long, dark jacket that hung past their hips. Couldn't tell if it was a boy or girl from that distance. Their head was tilted slightly like they were waiting for something. I kept telling myself I should get out and ask if they were okay, but something held me back. Not fear, just hesitation, like my body didn't want to move closer. Instead, I cracked the window an inch and called out, "Hey, everything all right?" The kid didn't answer, didn't wave, didn't even twitch. They just kept staring at me. I was about to try again when the vending machine light flickered, and in that split second of dark, I swear the kid's eyes looked wrong. Not like a reflection or glare, just wrong. But the light came back, and I couldn't tell if I'd imagined it. I rubbed my face, took a breath, and tried again. "Do you need help? Are your parents around?" This time the kid moved, slowly, deliberate steps, not rushed. They walked closer, stopping halfway between the machines and my truck. Still too far to make out details clearly, but close enough that I could see their face was pale. Too pale for a kid spending time outdoors. Then this small, even voice carried across the lot. "Have you seen our parents' ship?" The wording hit me strange. I started to answer automatically. "What? Your parents' what?" But I blinked, just once. And the kid was suddenly right outside my cab door. No footsteps, no running, just a shift in position so fast it knocked something loose in my brain. They were standing almost close enough to touch the door handle. I jerked back so hard I hit my elbow on the gear shift. The kid tilted their head again, eyes fixed on me through the window. And now that they were close, I saw what I missed before. No whites, no pupils, just two solid black eyes like polished stones. I froze. Not because of the eyes exactly, but because they weren't scary. They were empty. Not angry, not wide, not glaring, just blank. I reached for the lock to make sure it was engaged. My fingers felt numb. The kid didn't try the door or come any closer. They just said, almost too soft to hear, "They're waiting." Before I could respond, a light pulsed from behind the tree line. Not a steady glow, more like something throbbing once every couple seconds. A dull white, almost bluish, lighting up the branches from behind. No sound, no movement, just that slow, unnatural pulse. The kid turned, not with their body, but their head rotating first, strange and slow. Then they started walking toward the trees. Not turning around, not checking if I followed, just walking toward the pulsing light like they'd been called. I yelled out without thinking, "Hey, wait!" My voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. The kid didn't stop. The light continued its slow rhythm, painting the fog a faint blue for a second at a time. I thought maybe it was a Forest Service truck or some kind of equipment, but there was no engine, no shadows moving, nothing that made sense. I fumbled for my phone. No service, not surprising out there, but I kept it in my hand anyway, like it was some kind of safety blanket. I watched the kid until they reached the edge of the trees. They didn't hesitate. They just disappeared into the dark between the trunks, swallowed up like they'd walked into a hallway. The pulsing light brightened suddenly, one long, steady flare that lit up the whole line of trees like daylight. Then it was gone, just like someone unplugged it. The lot went dark again, except for the weak security bulb above the vending machines. The fog settled back into place. The crickets, silent until that moment, started up like nothing had happened. I sat in my truck for a long time, gripping the steering wheel with both hands even though the engine was still off. My chest felt tight in a weird way, like I'd been running. I kept watching the tree line, half expecting the kid to walk back out. They never did. After maybe 10 minutes, I started the truck. The engine sounded too loud, echoing off the empty parking lot. I pulled out without checking the mirrors, without looking back, and got back onto the highway. I drove another 40 miles before stopping again, this time at a truck plaza full of people, lights, noise, the whole sensory overload. Only then did I notice the time. It was 3:41 a.m. I had parked at the rest stop at 2:04. The whole thing couldn't have taken more than 10 minutes, maybe 15. But an hour and a half had passed. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the diner until sunrise, drinking bad coffee and staring at nothing. When I drove past that same stretch of highway the next week, the rest stop was empty again, same as before. I didn't pull in to check. I didn't look for footprints or broken branches. I didn't want to. All I know is that the kid walked toward that pulsing light without looking back. And I was glad, more than I can explain, that they didn't ask me to follow. The knocking started while Lauren and I were still cleaning up the kitchen. It was a soft, steady tapping, not loud enough to be someone desperate, but too deliberate to be branches or the wind. We both froze at the same time, looking at each other like we were silently asking if the other had heard it. It was just after midnight. We live outside Asheville, up a ways toward the Pisgah foothills, the kind of place where your backyard is more trees than grass, and the neighbors are half a mile away. The night had been calm, warm for early spring, a little muggy, no wind, so the sound felt out of place right away. The tapping came again, this time with a little rhythm to it. We stepped into the living room, which was dark, except for the counter light behind us. The sliding glass door faces our backyard. From where we stood, we could see the shape of two figures up against the glass. Small, too small to be adults. Lauren whispered, "Is that kids?" I didn't answer. I just walked closer. Two children stood outside, side by side, their faces almost pressed to the door. A boy and a girl, maybe around 10 or 11. They both wore plain dark clothing, long sleeves, long pants, like they'd dressed for colder weather than we actually had. Their hair hung flat against their heads, damp from something that wasn't rain. I'd never seen them before. They didn't look like anyone from the houses down the hill. The boy lifted his hand and knocked again, 3 quiet taps, while staring straight into the house. I reached for the wall switch out of habit, but hesitated before actually flipping it. Something about illuminating myself felt wrong. I cleared my throat. "Hey, you two okay? Are you lost?" The girl leaned forward slightly. Her voice was small but clear through the glass. "Can we come in and wait for the lights?" I felt Lauren step up behind me. She spoke before I could. "What lights?" The kids didn't answer. They just stood there, perfectly still. No swaying, no shifting weight, no turning their heads. That was what struck me first, not their appearance, not their weird question, just how unnaturally still they were. I tried again. "Where are your parents? Did someone drop you off? Are you hurt?" Nothing. Their faces didn't change. Then the boy said, "It's almost time." I felt this pressure build behind my ears, like the air around us changed. Subtle, but real enough that I found myself swallowing to pop my ears. The kitchen light flickered behind us. "Maybe we should call someone," Lauren whispered. Before I could answer, the lights in the entire house went out. Everything dropped into black. There wasn't even that warm glow you get from appliances or devices on standby. It was just instant darkness. And in that darkness, outside the glass, a low humming sound rose up. Not mechanical, not electrical, more like a deep vibration coming through the ground itself. Our windows trembled just enough that I felt it in my feet before I heard it in my ears. I backed away from the door on instinct. Lauren grabbed my arm. "What is that?" she whispered. The humming grew stronger, not loud enough to hurt, but deep enough that it made my chest feel tight. The kids were just silhouettes now, backlit faintly by the hazy night sky, but even in that low light I could see their eyes. They were completely black, no whites, no reflectiveness, just 2 dark emptinesses staring in at us. The girl said again, soft and calm, "We need to come inside." I shook my head, though I wasn't sure they could see it. No, you need to. Just wait. We're calling someone." "We have to wait for the lights," the boy said. "It's safer." The humming pulsed, like it was breathing. I fumbled in the dark for my phone on the counter, but couldn't see anything. My fingers slid across dishes, a cutting board, then finally grabbed the phone. Dead. Not low battery. Dead. It wouldn't even show the charging icon when I tried the cord. Lauren tried hers. Same thing. The humming steadied into something almost rhythmic. Then, just as suddenly as the power had cut out, the lights snapped back on. Every light in the house at once, and the humming stopped so fast the silence felt sharp. I spun toward the glass door. The kids were gone. 1 second they'd been inches from the glass, faces pressed close enough to fog it slightly. The next they weren't there at all. No movement, no sound, just empty patio. Lauren whispered, "Where did they?" I unlocked the sliding door before she finished. I don't know why. Maybe part of me needed proof that they'd actually been there. I stepped outside onto the deck. The air felt weirdly warm, like the temperature had jumped. The trees didn't move, no insects chirping, No night sounds at all. The yard was visible now in the porch light. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Then Lauren said, "Look, tiny footprints, dozens of them." Leading from the sliding door across the grass, bare feet, small. The sizes didn't match, some larger, some smaller, like multiple kids had walked together. They trailed toward the tree line at the back of the yard, stopping right where the woods started. There were no prints coming from the woods, only going into them. I stood there staring at the trail. The grass wasn't even dewy, so whatever had made the prints must have had damp feet, like they'd stepped out of water. Lauren grabbed my sleeve. "Let's go inside." We locked the door and sat on the couch in the lit-up living room, both of us still listening for the humming or knocking or anything at all. The house felt too bright, but neither of us was willing to turn any lights off. After a while, the normal night noises returned. Crickets, a distant owl, the low hum of the fridge clicking back on. We didn't talk much, didn't know what to say. Around 2 a.m., when it felt like enough time had passed to call it over, I checked the backyard again from the window. The footprints were still there, darkening in the porch light. No movement in the woods. The next morning, the prints were still visible, though the sun had dried them out. I followed them to the tree line, but didn't step in. The woods felt off somehow, like stepping past the first branch would shift the air again. When the wind kicked up around mid-morning, the grass smoothed itself out and the prints gradually disappeared, bending back into place. By noon, it looked like a normal backyard again. Neither of us found anything else. No torn clothes, no dropped toys, nothing to suggest real children had been there. But we both heard the knocking. We both saw the kids. And we both remember the humming, how it filled the whole yard, like it wasn't coming from the sky or the forest, but from everywhere at once. We still live in the same house, same sliding door, same woods. But when midnight gets close, we check the glass more often than we admit. And we don't open the curtains if we hear tapping. I was half asleep in the back of my truck when the tapping started. Not loud, just this light, rhythmic tap, tap, tap against the passenger side window. I remember thinking it was probably a branch or maybe a bird landing weird because nothing else made sense at the time. I was parked off an old service road near Lake Chelan in Washington, one of those wide dirt pull-offs people use during fishing season. I'd been there before. It was quiet, usually empty after dark, and the weather that night was mild. Cool but not cold, the kind of temperature where you don't really need a jacket unless the wind picks up. I'd fallen asleep around midnight after hiking most of the day. I wasn't even fully out, more of a drifting, half-dreaming state, when that tapping pulled me up. I tried to ignore it for a second, hoping it would stop, but it kept going. Too even. Too deliberate. I pushed myself upright, the sleeping bag bunching around my legs, and grabbed my phone. It was 3:07 a.m., no notifications. I didn't have service out there anyway. The tapping stopped the moment I shifted. Just gone. I sat still for a second, listening. The trees were quiet, no wind, no bugs buzzing against the glass. I don't know why, but that silence made me more nervous than the tapping did. I leaned over and looked through the cab window toward the passenger side. At first, I didn't see anything except the reflection of my own face in the glass. Then something moved, just a shape at the edge of my vision. I turned my head, and that's when I saw him. A kid, maybe 12 years old, thin, wearing this charcoal-colored hoodie that looked too big for him. He was standing right outside the window, close enough that I could see the outline of his hair through the glass. I froze so hard it felt like my muscles locked. He lifted his hand and tapped the window again. Soft, like he didn't want to scare me, but also didn't care if he did. I didn't open the door or roll the window down. I just said, "Hey, you okay?" My voice cracked a little. He nodded, slow and weirdly calm. Then he said, "Can I come inside where it's warm?" His voice threw me off. It was steady but flat, no emotion behind it. And the night wasn't cold. I mean, cool, sure, but definitely not cold enough for a kid to be wandering around shaking or anything. But he wasn't shaking. He wasn't even breathing heavy like he'd been walking far. "Where are your parents?" I asked. He didn't answer that. He just repeated, "Can I come inside?" I reached for my flashlight, keeping my eyes on him as best I could. Something about him felt wrong, and I didn't know why yet. When I clicked the flashlight on and pointed it toward the window, I expected him to jump or squint or something. Instead, he just stared straight into it. That's when I saw his eyes. Just black. Not dark brown, not shadowed. Black. Like the whole eye was one solid color. No reflection from the light. No glare. Nothing. My stomach dropped in this heavy, instinctive way. I didn't have a name for what I was looking at, but every part of my body told me to keep the doors locked. "I'm not opening the door," I said. My voice sounded stronger than I felt. "Tell me where your parents are and I'll—" "They're almost here," he said. That didn't sound like reassurance. It sounded like a warning. He turned his head then, like he was listening for something behind him. I tried to follow his gaze, but the forest was just a wall of dark. Then the light swept across the tree line. It came from the right, moving slow like a searchlight, but quieter than any car headlights I'd ever seen. It was bright white, almost bluish. It lit up the branches in this smooth glide that didn't match the usual bounce of someone walking with a flashlight. My first thought was, hikers? But who hikes with a spotlight at 3 a.m. and in that perfect, steady sweep? I looked back at the kid. He was gone, not walking away, not running, just gone. Like I'd blinked and lost him. I scrambled to unlock my phone, even though I knew I didn't have service. I dialed 911 anyway. Nothing. Call failed. The light passed across the tree line a second time. Same movement, same brightness, nothing mechanical about it. No sound. No shadows stretching and shifting the way they should. I slid into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine fired on the first try, thank God. For a second I hesitated, wondering if I should stay in case that kid came back. But everything in me said leaving was the only smart option. I backed onto the service road fast enough that gravel kicked up against the truck bed. The light kept moving between the trees, slow and lazy, like it wasn't in any rush to leave. Once I got about a quarter-mile down the road, the light slipped out of sight behind the trees. I kept driving anyway. I didn't stop until I was on the main road heading back toward Chelan proper. When I checked the clock again, it was 3:14 a.m. That didn't make sense at first. It felt like more time had passed. Not a lot more, but enough that the numbers didn't line up right in my head. I tried to shake it off. About 15 minutes later, I pulled into a gas station that was closed for the night. I parked under one of the lights and just sat there. The cab felt too quiet, too still. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, and I kept checking the windows like something might be standing outside them. I didn't try to sleep again until sunrise. Even then, it was more like dozing with my eyes half open. The next day, I drove back to the pull-off because part of me needed to see it in daylight. The spot looked normal. No footprints except my own, and maybe some older ones from hikers. No melted patches in the brush or anything strange on the ground. No signs a kid had been there. But I didn't stay long. I grabbed the rest of my gear and headed out. I told myself I'd come back later in the season, and maybe try camping again when more people were around. I didn't. Every time I thought about going back, I remembered that tapping on the glass. That flat voice asking to come inside where it's warm. Those completely black eyes reflecting nothing. And the way he disappeared between one blink and the next, right when that white light swept across the trees. I don't know what I saw out there. I've tried to explain it 100 different ways. Maybe the kid was sick or injured or had some eye condition I'd never heard of. Maybe the light was from people night hiking with high-powered gear. Maybe I was half asleep and more confused than I realized. But I know what I saw. I know how wrong it felt. And I know I left. I made it home. I'm fine now. I just don't camp alone anymore. And I haven't slept in the back of my truck since. I saw the kid on the side of County Road 18 just after 11. It was one of those muggy late August nights where the sky is clear but the air feels thick, and the only lights are your headlights and whatever stars manage to punch through the haze. I'd been driving home from my brother's place in Freeport, taking the back roads because I liked the quiet. Hardly anyone uses that stretch at night except farmers and the occasional long hauler cutting through. I spotted the kid because he wasn't moving, just standing at the edge of the cornfield, right where the gravel shoulder meets the asphalt. A small figure, maybe 10 or 11, arms hanging loose, head tilted down like he was staring at his shoes. No backpack, no flashlight, no bike. Nothing. I slowed immediately. It wasn't even a decision, just reflex. A kid alone that late in the middle of nowhere didn't make sense. I rolled to a stop a few yards ahead and threw my hazards on. The blinking amber lights lit up the road behind me, and the corn on either side shifted slightly in the breeze. I got out of the car, keeping my hands visible so I didn't come off as threatening. The night air hit me warm and damp. "Hey," I called out. "You all right? You hurt?" The kid didn't answer, didn't turn his head, didn't show any sign he'd heard me. I took a few steps closer, the gravel crunching under my shoes. "Are you lost? Do you need a ride? I can call someone, your parents, the sheriff, whoever." Still nothing. I got close enough to see that he was wearing a thin gray t-shirt and shorts. Not dressed for how sticky the air was, as if he didn't feel it. His arms were pale in the headlights. I crouched a little to try to get on his eye level. "Hey, buddy. Look, I can help you. You just need to tell me what's going on." His head shifted slightly, but not enough to look at me. And then he spoke. "Don't stay on this road soon." His voice was quiet and flat. No fear, no urgency, just a steady line of sound that didn't match the weirdness of the statement. "What do you mean?" I asked. "What's going to happen?" He didn't reply. Didn't move. I checked the sky out of instinct. Perfectly clear. No storms, no clouds, just darkness and stars. I glanced back at my car, thinking maybe I should call 911. When I looked at the kid again, he'd stepped a few inches closer to the cornfield, like he was dry-fitting toward it. I hadn't seen him move. It was like the distance between us had changed on its own. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If you don't want help, that's fine, but you can't stay out here alone. There's nothing around for miles." The kid finally reacted, but not to what I said. He lifted one hand and pressed his palm gently against his own thigh, like he was grounding himself, and repeated, "Don't stay on this road soon." "Soon when?" I asked. "Next hour? Next minute?" That's when I felt the vibration. Not through the ground at first, through the air. A subtle buzzing in my chest. The same feeling you get standing too close to heavy machinery, except there was nothing around us but corn and empty road. I held my breath and listened. The asphalt trembled under my shoes. A low, deep vibration ran along the road like something enormous was passing overhead, except the sky was silent and still. No wind, no aircraft lights, nothing visible. The kid didn't react at all, like he expected it. The vibration grew stronger, enough that I had to widen my stance to keep my balance. It didn't rattle like an earthquake, more like a heavy engine idling right above us, but completely silent. My teeth buzzed. I looked up again, desperate to see something that explained it. Still nothing. Just stars. I took a step back. "Okay, we need to go. Come on, come with me." The vibration stopped. Instantly. Like a switch flipped. The night returned to its normal thickness, crickets starting back up in a scattered chorus like they were confused. The kid finally lifted his chin. Slowly. Too slowly. When his face came into the full wash of my headlights, I saw his eyes. Black, not dark brown. Solid black. No whites, no shine. Just flat voids staring straight at me like they weren't reflecting the light at all. I stumbled back one more step, my heel catching on the gravel. Jesus. He didn't blink, didn't flinch. Just watched me, expression blank. Then he said as calmly as before, "It isn't safe here." I swallowed hard. "Okay," I said, "then let's leave." He turned away, not with his feet at first, but with his head, rotating toward the cornfield like he'd heard something call to him. His body followed a heartbeat later, stiff and strange, like he had to remind himself how walking worked. Then he stepped into the corn, not around it, not pushing it aside, just straight into it. The tall stalks parted with this soft, whispering sound, hardly moving even as he disappeared between them. I ran forward without thinking. "Hey, wait, come back!" But by the time I reached the edge of the field, the stalks were settling, swaying like someone had walked through. But I couldn't see him. The rows were too dense, too tall, and there was no flashlight strong enough to cut through that kind of darkness. "Kid," I yelled, "come back! It's dangerous in there." Silence. Then, somewhere deep in the field, something rustled. Light, quick movement. Could have been a raccoon. Could have been something following him. It didn't repeat. I backed away slowly. When I got to my car, I checked the time out of habit, 11:32. I'd left my brother's place at 10:50. The drive home should have been 20 minutes, but it felt like more time had passed. I drove the last few miles home, gripping the wheel so tight my fingers went numb. The whole way, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the kids standing on the shoulder behind me. Nothing followed me, but the odd buzzing sensation lingered in my chest all night, fading only after I finally crashed on the couch around 4. The next morning, I drove back down County Road 18. The spot where I'd stopped looked normal. No footprints except my own. No bent stalks at the edge of the corn. No sign anyone had been there. I walked along the shoulder anyway, kicking at gravel, hoping for something, anything that would prove the kid wasn't just a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the road was quiet, the sky clear, and somewhere across the cornfield, something let out a long, low creaking sound. Not wind, not an animal, more like metal cooling after being heated. I didn't check it out. I got back in my car and left. I don't take County Road 18 at night anymore. It's not a fear thing. It's more like the kid gave me a warning, and even if it made no sense, I listened. And sometimes when I'm out late and the sky is too quiet, I still feel that vibration in my chest, just for a second, like something huge is passing unseen overhead. I noticed them as soon as I looked up from restocking the cigarette shelf. 2 kids standing side by side at pump 6, perfectly still. No car, no parents, no movement at all. Just standing there facing the store. It was close to 1:30 a.m., a slow Tuesday night at the gas station off Route 14 outside of Rockford. The kind of night where the hum of the coolers feels louder than anything else. It had just stopped raining, and the pavement outside glistened under the canopy lights. The air had that clean, wet smell that comes after a heavy downpour, and the station was completely empty, except for an old Honda parked at one of the vacuum stations across the lot. I remember thinking maybe the kids were waiting for someone inside, but nobody was in the store except me, and nobody had come through in almost an hour. I watched them for a few seconds. They didn't fidget, didn't look around, didn't talk to each other. The taller one, the boy, I think, had one hand hanging at his side and the other tucked into his sleeve like he was holding something small. The shorter one, a girl with shoulder-length hair plastered to her head from the rain, had both arms straight down like she was bracing herself. I waited another moment, expecting them to move. They didn't. Jesus, I muttered under my breath. Where'd you 2 come from? The more I stared, the more wrong they looked. Not injured wrong. Not lost wrong. Just wrong. Like they were waiting for something on a timer only they could see. I stepped away from the counter and went to the door. I cracked it open and called out, "Hey, are you guys okay? You need help?" No reaction. Both heads tilted up slightly, like they were listening to something in the air. I didn't hear anything. The night was quiet, except for the hum of the sign out front and the ticking sound the pumps make when no one's using them. I took a few steps out onto the sidewalk under the canopy. The damp air hit me immediately. I folded my arms against the cold and tried again. "You're not supposed to be out here this late. Where are your parents?" The boy's head turned toward me in one smooth movement. No hesitation, no startle, no blinking. He asked in this flat, almost too clear voice, "Do you know what's above you?" It caught me off guard so hard I literally laughed just out of nervous confusion. Above me? Like the canopy? I looked up at it out of reflex. What? Did it look like it was falling or something? When I looked back down, both kids were staring at me. That was the moment I realized their eyes were completely black. From where I stood, maybe 10 feet away, the canopy lights should have reflected off them at least a little. But there was nothing, just 2 dark pits where their eyes should have been. My mouth went dry. I stepped back once. I don't know what you're talking about," I said. Right then, the station lights flickered. Not the usual quick dim you get during a surge. This was a full body drop in power. The canopy lights sputtered, the soda machine died for half a second, and the pump lights flashed off and back on. Inside, I heard the security monitor beep as the feed reset. The kids didn't flinch. All the hair on my arms stood up. It felt like the air pressure changed, just a little, like something passed overhead that I couldn't see. Not wind, more like static. "I'm going inside," I said automatically, already backing toward the door. The kids didn't move. didn't follow, didn't even turn their heads as I slipped back into the store and locked the door out of pure instinct. I hurried behind the counter and stared at the screen that showed the exterior cameras. At first, all 4 camera views were black. Then the feeds blinked back on. Pump 6 flashed white. Not bright like headlights, brighter. A shimmer almost like a sphere of light had burst across the lens for a split second. Just long enough for my brain to register it. Just long enough that I leaned closer to the monitor, thinking maybe moisture hit the camera. Then the feed stabilized. Pump 6 was empty. Both kids were gone. I blinked hard, thinking maybe I'd looked away and missed them running off. But the cameras cover the whole lot. There was nowhere for 2 kids to vanish without crossing the frame of at least 1 camera. I flipped through the angles anyway. Side lot, air pump, diesel lane, back corner by the dumpsters. Nothing. Not even footprints in the wet pavement. I checked the timestamp. Only 8 seconds had passed between the flicker and the sphere of light. I looked out the front windows. The rain-soaked pavement reflected the canopy lights. No movement, no silhouettes, no kids. I waited a couple minutes, expecting them to reappear or knock or something. They didn't. Then I did something stupid. I stepped back outside. I didn't go far, just a few steps under the canopy. I looked around the lot again. The air felt too still, like everything was paused. Pump 6's screen blinked once, the way it does when someone lifts the handle. But the handle was still on its cradle. The smell in the air changed. A faint metallic tang, like the way the air smells right before a lightning strike. I backed up toward the door. I kept expecting to see the kids walking across the lot or standing at the edge of the grass. Nothing. Inside again, I locked the door and kept one eye on the monitors for the rest of my shift. Around 4 a.m., 2 truckers came in for coffee, and the normal noise of conversation helped break that strangeness hanging around in my head. But every time I glanced at Pump 6 on the screen, I felt that tight, uneasy pressure in my chest again. At sunrise, I walked the lot one more time before heading home. The pavement was nearly dry by then. No footprints, no scuffs, nothing to prove anyone had been standing there. I paused at Pump 6 for a moment. The air felt normal again. I looked up at the canopy because of what the boy had said. "Do you know what's above you?" But there was nothing there except the underside of the metal roof and the morning sky beyond it. I clocked out early. Didn't sleep much when I got home. I kept replaying the way they stood there, unmoving, the way their eyes looked, and that strange flash on the camera. The station owner asked later if I'd hit the wrong button on the system because the cameras glitched. I told him I didn't know, which wasn't a lie. All I know is the kids were there, they spoke to me, the lights flickered, something bright showed up on the feed, then they were gone. And whenever I work nights now, I try not to look too long at Pump 6. I noticed the kid before I noticed the swing moving. That's what made me stop. It was almost midnight, and the school grounds should have been dead quiet. I was halfway through my last round of the night, checking doors, shutting off lights, making sure the trash bins behind the cafeteria were locked. Same routine I'd done for almost 6 years at Lincoln Elementary. The air was cold and dry, the kind of early winter night where your breath comes out sharp. I'd left my jacket unzipped because I wasn't planning to be outside long. The floodlights around the parking lot cast these wide cones of pale yellow across the asphalt. Beyond that, the field stretched out into darkness, with only the faint glow of the distant street lamps touching the edges of the playground. That's when I saw the shape on the swings, just a single kid-sized silhouette, sitting perfectly still. The swing next to them rocked slightly in the wind, chains giving off a soft metallic creak. The one the kid sat on didn't move at all. I stopped dead at the edge of the field. The school was closed for winter break. No clubs, no aftercare, no sports teams. There shouldn't have been anybody out there, especially not a child. I told myself maybe one of the teachers had brought their kid by and they wandered off. But no cars were in the lot except mine, and the gate to the field was locked hours earlier. I cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hey, you okay out here?" Nothing. The kid didn't even look at me. Their head was tilted all the way back, staring straight up at the sky like they were watching something. I glanced up too, but all I saw were a few stars and the dim haze of town lights. I started walking toward the playground, crunching across the frost-hardened grass. My keys jingled on my belt with every step. I kept talking as I approached because something about the stillness felt wrong. "You lost? You live nearby? It's a little late to be out." The kid raised one hand, not toward me, but upward, like they were reaching for something. I slowed down. "Are you hurt?" I reached the wood chip border of the playground. The smell of cold plastic and old mulch hit me. The metal bars of the jungle gym creaked softly in the wind. Then the kid whispered, voice thin and tight, "They're coming for me." I stopped so fast my foot slid on the frost. "What? Who's coming? Do you need help?" The kid lowered their hand but didn't look away from the sky. I stepped onto the playground, wood chips crunching under my boots, and got close enough to see more details. Dark clothes, too thin for the temperature, hands resting lightly on the swing chains, and hair that hung straight down, unmoving, like the kid wasn't breathing hard at all. "Hey," I said softly. "Look at me. I can take you inside, okay? It's warm in there. Just tell me what's going on." The kid finally lowered their head, very slowly, as if they'd forgotten how gravity worked. And when their face aligned with mine, I saw their eyes. Black, not shadowed, not dark. Solid, glassy black, reflecting none of the field lights behind me. I took a step back without meaning to. The cold air burned in my throat. "Okay," I said carefully. "Let's just stay calm. You can come with me. We'll call someone." The kid didn't blink, didn't speak. Then the light swept across the field. It came from the left, moving in a perfectly straight line across the playground. A narrow beam of white, maybe 3 feet wide, glowing like a spotlight but with no visible source. No hum from a drone, no helicopter sound, no floodlights from the buildings. Just a beam sliding across the grass as smooth as a laser pointer. My shadow stretched long across the ground as the light passed over me, sharpening every detail like daylight. The kid whispered, "Too late." I whipped my head upward, hoping to see a plane, a searchlight, anything. But the sky was empty. Clear. No clouds. No movement. Nothing that could have produced a beam that bright. The light swept over the playground next. The swings lit up like they were under a pure white sun. The metal chains gleamed. The frost on the plastic seats sparkled. And the kid, gone. Not faded, not lifted, not blurred. Just gone. The swing hung still, perfectly straight, the seat cold and untouched. I took 2 shaky steps forward and grabbed the swing, half expecting it to still be warm. It was freezing, like no one had been sitting there at all. The beam of light continued moving across the field, reaching the far fence. Then it simply stopped. No dimming, no flicker, like it had hit an invisible wall. It vanished. The field went dark again except for the usual street lamps. I stood there breathing too fast, scanning the tree line, the shadows, the sky. Nothing moved. The silence felt thick. Even the wind had stopped. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded small. "Kid, you there?" No response. I checked behind the slide, the picnic tables, the equipment shed. I even shined my flashlight across the field. Nothing. I walked the perimeter twice, calling out until my throat hurt. If the kid had run, I would have seen footprints. If they'd hidden, I would have spotted movement. The frost was untouched, except for my own tracks. After 10 minutes, I went back inside the building, locking the door behind me. My hands shook when I turned the deadbolt. I sat in the break room trying to calm down, listening for anything. Footsteps, a knock, anything at all. Nothing happened. The rest of my shift, I kept replaying what I'd seen. The kid's eyes. Their voice. That beam of light with no origin. I didn't write an incident report. What would I even have written? At sunrise, I walked out to the playground again. The swing was still. Frost covered everything. Not a single disturbance in the wood chips, except where I'd stepped the night before. I checked the field too. No footprints. No marks from equipment or vehicles. Just empty winter grass stretching between chain-link fences. I didn't tell anyone on the morning shift. They'd have laughed. Or worse, they'd have believed me. I just went home, lay in bed, and stared at the ceiling until my alarm went off again for the next night's shift. Now, every time I walk past that playground after dark, I look at the swings. Sometimes they sway a little in the wind. Sometimes they don't move at all. But twice since that night, I've found the swing facing slightly crooked when the rest are lined up straight, like someone small sat there for a minute, watching the sky, then slipped away before I came outside. I always stand there for a moment, listening to the quiet, waiting to hear a whisper or see a beam of light cross the field again. It hasn't happened. Not yet. I was taking my trash cans to the curb when I first saw them. Two kids standing on the front porch of the house next door, knocking on the door in this weird, steady rhythm. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. It was almost too even, like they'd practiced it. It was close to 9:45 p.m., early September, warm enough that I was in shorts and a t-shirt. Our subdivision outside Fort Wayne is usually quiet at that hour. Porch lights, sprinkler timers, the occasional dog barking. Nothing strange. But the moment I saw those kids, something in me locked up. My neighbor, the Fergusons, were out of town visiting their daughter. Their driveway was empty. Their porch light was off. No reason for anyone to be knocking. I stopped near the edge of my driveway, one hand on the trash can handle, listening. The kids didn't notice me at first. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. They were both facing the door, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. A boy and a girl, maybe 11 or 12. Their clothes were plain, dark pants, long-sleeved shirts, too much fabric for the warm night. Their hair hung straight and flat, and neither of them seemed to be sweating. I cleared my throat. You two okay? They froze. Not startled, not surprised, just stopped. The boy's hand hovered midair from his last knock. Then, in perfect unison, both heads turned toward me. Something about that motion sent a cold feeling through my chest. It was too synchronized, like mirrors moving. The girl spoke first. "Do you have a place to hide from the bright ones?" Her voice was soft, almost polite, but the question made zero sense. "The what?" I asked. They didn't step off the porch. They didn't come closer. They just stared. And that's when I noticed their eyes. At first I thought the porch shadows were playing tricks on me. The Fergusons' porch light was off, and only the faint light from the street lamp reached them. But the kids' eyes weren't catching any reflections. They were just solid black, depthless, like someone had filled their eyes in with ink. My mouth went dry. "Look, I think you might be lost. Nobody's home there." The boy blinked once, a slow, oddly heavy blink, and asked, "Do you have somewhere safe?" Something shifted in the air then, a pressure almost. The hairs on my arms lifted, and the space around us felt charged, the way it does before a storm, except the sky was clear. I pulled my phone from my pocket without thinking. I don't know what I expected. Maybe to call someone, or at least use the flashlight. The screen was already on, but it jittered violently. The icons stretched, glitched, flickered. My wallpaper split into jagged shapes. The time at the top kept changing. 9:45, 9:46, 3:12, 12:08, back to 9:45. I stared at it, my stomach twisting. What the hell? The kids didn't react. They just stood there, watching me, those black eyes reflecting nothing. A low hum started in the air. Not loud, barely above a whisper, but deep enough that I felt it more than heard it, like a faint electrical vibration threading through the neighborhood. My porch light flickered once. The street lamp hummed louder. "Do you hear that?" I asked, even though I didn't expect them to answer. The kids nodded, perfectly in sync. The girl said, "They're close." The boy added, "Too close." I looked up and down the street, expecting maybe a car to pull around the corner, some explanation for the strange humming. But the road was empty. All the houses were dark and quiet. My phone buzzed violently in my hand and then went black, refusing to turn back on. I took a step back toward my own porch, heart pounding. "Okay, I don't know what's going on, but you need to tell me where you live." Instead of, "I'll walk you home," or... The hum grew sharper, not louder, just more focused, almost like it was coming from the air directly above us. I looked up instinctively. The sky was empty, clear, silent. No planes, no drones, no lights, nothing that could have made that sound. When I looked back down, the kids were gone. Not running down the driveway, not cutting through the yard, not stepping off the porch. Gone. The Fergusons' porch was empty, completely empty, no sign of movement. No sound from the bushes, nothing. I froze, staring at the spot where they'd stood. My pulse hammered in my neck. The hum faded slowly, draining out of the air until the night felt normal again, too normal. I backed up toward my own house, scanning the street, the shadows, the yards. Everything was still. Even the cicadas seemed to be waiting for something. Then I noticed something on the porch. Smears. Small, faint marks on the wood, like someone with wet soles had stood there. Not footprints exactly. just darkened impressions where pressure had been applied. They formed two small, perfect ovals side by side. I stepped closer, crouching down to look. The wood was cool to the touch, but the faint marks were warm, as if someone had just been standing there moments earlier. The trash cans sat forgotten in the street. My phone restarted on its own, the screen returning to normal like nothing had happened. I didn't call anyone, didn't know what to say. I went inside and locked every door. About half an hour later, I checked the porch again from my downstairs window. The marks on the wood had faded, drying in the warm night air. The street was still empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the kids hadn't left the neighborhood. Every so often, a faint hum drifted over the rooftops, too soft to pinpoint, too short to record. I sat on the couch until dawn, listening to it come and go, never loud enough to explain, never long enough to ignore. The Fergusons came home 2 days later. I didn't tell them what happened. I only asked if their security camera had caught anything on the 10th. It hadn't. But the camera log showed something else. At 9:45 p.m., the feed froze for 12 full seconds. A perfect static frame of the empty porch. When it came back, the timestamp jumped to 9:47. A full 2 minutes lost, and the porch was still empty. I got back to the trailhead just as the last of the light was fading behind the ridge. The sky had that washed-out blue tone you only get right before full dark, when the air cools fast and the shadows stretch out thin. I'd spent the afternoon hiking the north loop of Pine Hollow, a place I knew well enough not to worry about losing the trail. I'd planned on being back to my car by 6:30 so I could grab dinner in town before heading home. My phone was dead. My fault for forgetting the battery pack, so the only timekeeper I had was my cheap analog watch. Last I'd checked, near the overlook, it said 5:52. When the parking lot finally came into view through the trees, I felt that little rush of relief you get at the end of a long hike. But the second I stepped out of the brush and into the gravel, I froze. Two kids were standing directly behind my car, just standing there, not talking, not moving, positioned almost perfectly centered behind the trunk, facing me. I stopped, maybe 20 yards away. They looked like siblings, boy and girl, somewhere around 10 or 11, both wearing dark clothes too light for the dropping temperature. The girl's hair was long and straight. The boy's was cut blunt just above his eyebrows. Neither of them had backpacks or water bottles, nothing that made sense for being out there so close to nightfall. My first thought was that maybe someone from the campground had lost track of their kids and they wandered over here, but something about them felt off, not in a dramatic way, just wrong enough that it made my arms prickle. I cleared my throat. "Hey there, you folks all right?" The kids didn't respond right away. They looked at me, but their expressions didn't change. I walked a few steps closer, stopping when I could make out their faces better in the dim light hanging over the restroom building. "Are your parents nearby?" I asked. The boy spoke first. "Did you feel the time skip too?" His voice was steady, completely emotionless. The girl stared straight at me, not blinking. I frowned. "Time skip? What do you mean?" The girl tilted her head a little. "You went missing," she said softly. "We watched." My stomach tightened. "Missing when?" She raised one hand and pointed toward the trail I'd just come down. "Up there." I turned around automatically, looking at the tree line. The forest was quiet, too quiet. I didn't hear the usual dusk chorus of insects, not even a single bird settling down. When I looked back at the kids, they hadn't moved. Something made me check my watch. 7:03 p.m. That wasn't possible. The hike back from the overlook took maybe 25 minutes, 30 if I slowed down, and I remembered being at the overlook around 6. I would have been pushing it to get back at exactly 6:30, but not an hour later. Still, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe I zoned out longer than I thought. Maybe I stopped somewhere without noticing. Maybe the watch was wrong. But the watch had never been wrong, not once. I tapped the glass and shook my wrist, but the hand stayed pinned at 7:03. "You were gone," the boy repeated. I swallowed hard. "Gone how? Did someone come by here?" They didn't answer. The girl's eyes shifted downward, and for the first time I noticed something else, how dark they were. Not brown, not shadowed, just dark. So dark they didn't catch the light at all. My pulse thumped in my throat. Look, I said, trying to stay calm. I don't know what's going on, but if you're lost, I can call someone once I charge my phone. Just tell me where you came from. The boy's chin lifted slightly, like he was listening to something far away. The girl mirrored him, same angle, same expression. Then I heard it. A faint buzzing sound, low and distant, drifting through the valley behind us. It pulsed in and out, rising smoothly, then dropping off. Not like insects, not like an engine. Something else. Something too large, too even. It made the air feel heavier. The boy whispered, "It's starting again." The buzzing grew stronger, vibrating through the gravel at my feet. I turned toward the ridge, expecting to see headlights, or maybe some kind of aircraft through the darkening sky. Nothing. Just the faint outline of the treetops and the valley dipping below. When I turned back, the kids were gone. Not walking away. Not running. Gone. The gravel behind my car was undisturbed. No footprints leading off into the brush. No rustling from the trees. No motion anywhere. I stepped forward, scanning left and right. My breathing picked up, sharp in the quiet. "Hello?" I called out. "Hey, kids!" My voice felt too loud in the empty lot. The buzzing dropped suddenly, a perfect, clean cutoff, like someone had muted the valley. The silence that followed was worse, deep, hollow. I circled my car, checking the shadows cast by the floodlight. Nothing. I walked toward the restroom building, peering around the corner. Empty. I strained to hear any sound of movement in the woods. There was still nothing. No insects, no wind, just the faint hiss of my own breath. After a minute, the normal sounds of the evening began trickling back, one cricket then another. A breeze rustled the tops of the pines. Something small skittered in the underbrush near the trail entrance. Only then did my chest loosen. I got into my car, hands shaking a little as I closed the door. The interior felt too tight, like the whole world had shrunk without warning. My watch still read 7:03. I started the engine and turned on the headlights. For a moment, the beams illuminated the spot where the kids had been standing. Just gravel, just air. I backed out of the lot and started down the mountain road. Every now and then, as the sky darkened completely, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing followed me, no movement, no shapes, no kids. But halfway down the valley, the buzzing started again. Faint, distant, almost like an echo. This time, it faded before I could find the source. When I got home, the first thing I did was plug in my phone. As soon as it powered up, the time synced automatically. 8:41 p.m., another hour gone. I checked my watch again. It finally ticked once and started moving normally. I haven't been back to Pine Hollow since. I didn't tell the rangers. I didn't tell my friends. I barely told myself. But sometimes when I look at that watch, I still get a strange, sinking feeling, like maybe that lost hour isn't done with me yet. We were driving back from my sister's place in Vista after staying later than we meant to. It was close to 10, maybe a little after, and the fog had rolled in earlier than usual. Thin at first, just soft patches drifting across the asphalt, but thickening the farther we got into the hills. My wife Erin was in the passenger seat scrolling through photos she'd taken that afternoon, and our daughter Lily was asleep in the back, her head tilted against the window. I'd driven that stretch of road hundreds of times, enough that the turns felt automatic. The fog wasn't bad enough to be dangerous, not yet, but it was the kind that eats your headlights and makes the world feel small. The radio was low, more background noise than anything. It was one of those calm, quiet family drives where no one talks much. We just rounded a bend and when Erin touched my arm. "Slow down." I eased onto the brake without thinking. The fog thickened right then, swelling across the road like a wave. For a second, I thought maybe it was another car kicking up moisture, but then two shapes materialized in the middle of the lane. Kids. Two of them, standing side by side, facing our car. I braked hard enough that the seatbelt dug into my shoulder. Lily jolted awake with a gasp behind me. The car stopped maybe 15 feet from the figures, just close enough for the headlights to catch their outlines. They didn't move. Didn't react. Just stood there, small and strangely rigid in the hazy white light cutting through the fog. Are they okay?" Erin whispered. I didn't answer. I was trying to understand what I was seeing. The kids looked about 10 or 11, a boy and a girl, dressed in plain dark clothes that didn't look suited for the cool night. No coats, no flashlights, no backpacks. Their hair looked wet, though it hadn't been raining. The boy's hands hung loosely at his sides. The girl's arms were held tight against her body. I put the car in park but didn't open the door. Something about the way they stood, completely motionless, made my chest tighten. "Should I honk?" I asked. "Don't," Aaron said immediately. The fog shifted around them, swirling in faint loops like someone was walking circles nearby, though nothing was. Then, slowly, the kids began to walk toward us. Not like children normally walk. No bouncing steps, no hesitation. Just slow, even movements in perfect sync. Lily whimpered behind us. "Mom, what are they doing?" I turned slightly in my seat. "It's okay, sweetie. Maybe they need help." But even saying it out loud made something in my stomach twist. The kids reached the front of the car and stopped. They were close enough now that I could see their faces more clearly through the fog-dappled windshield. Pale skin, smooth and expressionless. No flushing from cold, no fear, no exhaustion, just blank stillness. The girl leaned forward a little, her voice soft but somehow clear through the glass. "Can we ride with you until the bright passes?" Aaron's fingers tightened around my arm. "What did she say?" I swallowed. I don't know." The boy stepped closer, placing one hand lightly on the hood of the car. I couldn't see his eyes clearly, not at first. The fog refracted the light weirdly, smearing details. But when he lifted his chin just slightly, the headlights hit his face at a better angle. His eyes were wrong. Black. Completely. No whites, no reflections, just polished, dark surfaces that absorbed the light. The girl's eyes were the same. I froze. The road, the fog, the car, everything felt suddenly distant, like I was underwater. My heart thudded hard once, and then everything around me went silent. Even the radio cut out, dropping the car into this dead quiet that made it feel like the world around us had paused. Then Lily gasped. Not scared, shocked. "Daddy!" I looked up instinctively through the windshield. Something enormous passed overhead. Not fast, not slow, just gliding. A shape, triangular, so dark it seemed to erase the fog around its edges. No sound, no wind, no vibration, just a floating shape blocking out the faint moonlight above. Each corner of the triangle glowed faintly, like soft white embers, and crossbeams of dim light connected the points. It was low, too low, and drifting across the road at an angle, barely above the treetops. I didn't breathe. None of us did. The kids didn't look up. Their heads remained tilted slightly toward us, as if the massive thing overhead meant nothing to them. The triangle slid across the sky, silent as a falling leaf, and disappeared into the fog layer behind us. The moment it vanished, the radio popped softly back on. The engine hummed again. The world resumed in an instant. My breath returned in a shaky rush. Aaron whispered, "What the hell was that?" I looked back at the road. Empty. Completely empty. No kids, no shadows, no movement, just fog drifting gently across the asphalt. I blinked, trying to make sense of the missing shapes. I threw the car into park again and leaned out the window. Hello? Kids? Hello? My voice bounced back at me in a dull, muffled echo. I got out of the car, ignoring Aaron's panicked, "Mark, don't!" and walked to where the kids had stood. The fog swirled around my legs. The headlights carved pale tunnels through the haze. No footprints. Not one. The road was damp enough that any step should have left a mark. But the asphalt looked flawless, undisturbed. I crouched down, touching the road surface, cold, smooth, wrongly untouched. Aaron opened her door, but didn't get out. "Mark, please get back in." I stood slowly, scanning the fields on either side of the road. No movement, no rustling, nothing but the faint hum of insects muffled by fog. I got back into the car. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. Lily fell asleep again eventually, but Aaron stayed rigid, eyes fixed on the road ahead as if expecting something to reappear. Every so often the radio would crackle with static for a second, then clear again. I kept glancing up at the sky, half expecting that triangle to glide overhead again. It didn't. When we reached home and pulled into the driveway, the fog had thinned out. The normal sounds of the neighborhood felt almost jarringly ordinary. Inside, I checked my phone. The last timestamp before the event said 10:16 p.m. The next message, sent by my sister at 10:34 asking if we got home safely, came through while we were still halfway back. 18 minutes were gone. Not missed. Gone. Aaron said the drive felt shorter than usual. I agreed. But we didn't talk about it again that night. We tucked Lily in, checked the locks twice, and tried to settle into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the kids staring at us through the fog, asking to ride with us until the bright passes. And that triangular shape, silent, enormous, drifting through the night sky like it was searching for something or someone. We still drive that road sometimes, but never in fog, and never after sunset. I was taking Daisy out for her last walk of the night, sometime close to 10:30. It was early November, one of those cold, dry nights where you can see your breath even though the air is still. Our neighborhood in Cedar Ridge is usually quiet after 9, and the little park down the street is usually empty. Just a couple swings, a slide, a bench, and a patch of grass that always seems a bit too dark compared to the rest of the neighborhood. I only walked Daisy through there because she got restless if I kept her on the sidewalks too long. She liked sniffing the trees along the back fence, and the park was small enough that I could see the whole thing at once. Safe enough. Or it had always felt that way before. We'd just turned into the entrance when Daisy stopped pulling on the leash. Instead, she slowed down, ears perked, staring toward the swing set. That's when I saw them. 2 kids sitting on the swings, one on each end, perfectly still. Their legs hung straight down, toes not even brushing the ground. I stopped walking. For a second, I honestly couldn't process it. The park is usually dead at that hour. No teenagers cutting through, no late dog walkers besides me. The security lights around the tennis courts cast just enough glow to see their shapes, but not enough to make out details. The kids weren't talking. They weren't moving. They were just sitting there like they'd been placed on the swings. "Hello?" I called out. I didn't want to startle them, and part of me hoped they'd just wave or laugh or something normal. They didn't. Daisy let out a low whine, her body pressing closer to my leg. That was strange. She's usually friendly to a fault. She'll drag me across a street to sniff someone. Not now. She wouldn't take her eyes off the swings. I took a few steps closer, keeping the leash short. "Are you two okay? Is someone with you?" The kid on the left looked like a girl, long hair, maybe 10 or 11, lifted her head slowly, too slowly. Her face tilted in this oddly smooth motion until she was looking straight at me. The boy on the right did the same, synchronized perfectly. I froze. Their faces were pale in the patchy light, their expressions blank. They weren't shivering, even though I could see my own breath in front of me. Their clothes looked thin, dark shirts, dark pants, not warm enough for the night. Then the girl spoke. "Did you hear the calling tone?" Her voice was soft but carried, like she wasn't trying to whisper or yell, just stating something. "The what?" I asked. "The tone," the boy said, "from above." I looked up instinctively. The sky was clear, just a few scattered stars and a faint haze from the nearby highway. Nothing to make a tone. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "Is that why you're out here? Did you hear something weird?" They didn't answer. They just kept staring. Daisy pulled hard on the leash, backing up now, her growl low enough that I barely heard it. I reached down to calm her, but my hand shook a little. I didn't want to get closer to the swings, but it felt worse standing halfway between them and the sidewalk. I tried again. "Where are your parents? Do you live around here?" The girl straightened her back and her swing creaked slightly. "It's starting," she said. Before I could ask what she meant, the sound hit. A sharp metallic tone, like metal grinding against metal, but high and clean, almost like feedback from a huge speaker. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, vibrating through my teeth, then cut off instantly. No echo, no fade. Just gone. Daisy bolted. She yanked the leash so hard I dropped it. She ran full speed across the park toward our street, tail tucked, not even looking back. I spun around to grab the leash, but she was already halfway home. "Daisy!" I called, but she disappeared around the chain-link fence. I turned back immediately. The kids were gone. The swings were still moving, slowly, gently, like someone had just gotten off them. The chains clinked softly in the cold air, but the seats were empty. No kids running away, no shadows slipping behind the slide, no movement in the trees. Just the empty park and those swaying swings. I walked toward them without meaning to. My brain felt foggy, confused, like I was missing something obvious. The swings kept moving, tiny arcs back and forth, creaking lightly. The grass around the swing set was undisturbed. No footprints, no rustling, no sign of 2 children slipping away in the seconds it took me to turn. I checked behind the small shed that held the maintenance tools. Nothing. I scanned the sidewalk outside the park. Empty. My breath kept coming out too fast, frosting in the air in short bursts. I forced myself to walk home, calling for Daisy with every step. She was waiting on our porch, trembling, her paw scratching at the door like she couldn't stand being outside another second. I scooped up the leash and took her inside, locking the door behind us. She wouldn't leave my side for the rest of the night. Around midnight, while I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to calm down, I heard a faint, metallic ping from outside. Not loud, not long, just one small, sharp sound like something settled or shifted in the air. I turned off the lights and looked out the window toward the park. The swings were still moving. No wind. Nothing else stirred. I went back to the table and sat down, Daisy curled under my feet, shivering even though the house was warm. The tone hasn't happened again. At least, not in a way I've heard. But whenever I walk past the park now, even during the day, I feel my stomach twist, and Daisy won't go near the swings anymore. She avoids the whole patch of grass, pulling hard on the leash until we're back on the sidewalk. I haven't seen the kids since. Some nights, though, when the air is cold and the neighborhood is quiet, I swear I hear the swings creaking, back and forth, like someone is sitting there again, waiting, listening for that metallic tone from above. I heard the knocking sometime after 1 a.m. I'd been drifting in and out of sleep, half watching the muted TV in my motel room. I was staying at the Copper Lantern off Highway 84 in New Mexico, one of those older motels where the doors open straight to the outside and everything smells faintly like old carpet and cleaning spray. I wasn't planning on stopping there, but I'd gotten too tired to keep driving toward Flagstaff, and the stretch of desert between towns felt too empty to risk pushing through. The knocking wasn't loud, just 3 soft taps, a pause, then 3 more. For a second, I thought I dreamed it. But the pattern repeated, and something about how even it was made me sit up. I checked my phone, 1:12 a.m., and got out of bed, rubbing my face. I wasn't expecting company. The lot had been nearly empty when I checked in, and the clerk told me they only had 6 rooms booked for the night. The knocking came again. Yeah, I muttered, pulling on my sweatshirt. As I got closer to the door, I felt this weird hesitation settle into my chest. The motel room suddenly felt a lot smaller than it had before. Maybe it was just the lateness of the hour, or how quiet everything was outside the thin walls. No cars, no voices, no humming from the ice machine. I undid the latch and opened the door a few inches. 2 kids stood in the hallway. I froze. They weren't dressed for the desert night, just thin shirts and pants, the girl's hair hanging limp like it hadn't been brushed in days. The boy stood a step behind her. Both were staring straight at me. Can I help you?" I asked. The girl spoke first, her voice flat, almost practiced. "Did you see the light land?" I blinked at her. "The what?" The boy stepped forward. "The light?" He repeated. It landed. I opened the door a little wider, looking past them down the outdoor corridor. Nothing. Just the dim orange glow of the overhead bulbs and the faded blue doors on either side. I didn't remember hearing anything. No car pulling up, no footsteps. And definitely no light. I looked back at them. Something about their stillness bothered me. They weren't shivering, even though the temperature had dropped after sunset. They didn't seem scared or upset. Their hands were by their sides, fingers curled like they were waiting for instructions. "You kids staying here?" I asked. "Are your parents around?" They didn't answer. They didn't even blink. The girl tilted her head a fraction. "We need to know if you saw it." Before I could decide whether to step out or shut the door, the floor beneath us trembled. Not a full quake, just a single heavy jolt, like something massive touched down in the dirt outside the building. My door rattled in its frame. A picture on the wall behind me thudded lightly, but there was no sound, not even a rumble. Just that one impact, silent afterward. The kids didn't react. They didn't stumble or grab the railing. Their heads stayed fixed on me. "What the hell was that?" I whispered, more to myself than to them. Nothing, just their dark silhouettes framed in the corridor's weak light. My stomach sank suddenly. Something about the girl's eyes caught the light at a strange angle. No shine, no color, just solid black from corner to corner. The boys were the same. I felt myself take a step back into the room without meaning to. Listen, I said, my voice shakier than I wanted it to be. You need to. I looked down to the latch to close the door. When I looked up again, the hallway was empty. Completely empty. The corridor stretched out in both directions, motionless. No running footsteps, no doors shutting, no shadows disappearing around corners. Just the buzz of the old neon sign outside and the faint hum of the vent above my door. My heart hammered as I stepped outside and looked left, then right. Nothing. I walked a few feet down the walkway, scanning the parking lot. 3 cars sat scattered across the pavement, none running, none recently moved. I checked between the cars, behind the ice machine enclosure, even around the corner toward the vending area. No kids. I ran my hand through my hair and went back to my room, shutting the door firmly and locking both latches. I stayed by the peephole for several minutes, staring at the empty walkway. Eventually, I forced myself to sit on the edge of the bed. My phone screen jittered once, glitching like the brightness flickered, and then returned to normal. No notifications. No alerts of any kind. A few minutes later, I heard a faint creak from outside, like the sound of someone stepping on gravel. I held my breath, listening, but when I checked through the curtain, there was no one. I stayed awake until sunrise, the TV on low for company. When I checked out, I asked the clerk if any kids were staying there. She shook her head immediately. "Not tonight," she said. "Only adults checked in." I didn't push it. I just got in my car, started the engine, and sat there staring at the row of doors. Room 117, 119, 121, my room didn't look any different than the others. Same faded paint, same rattling AC unit beneath the window. Nothing that said 2 kids had ever stood outside at 1 in the morning asking about some light. I drove off and didn't look back. But sometimes, when I'm lying in some other cheap motel on some other lonely highway, I hear that soft knock again. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. I never open the door right away now. Not until I look through the peephole first. I was finishing up in the machine shed when I saw them. The sun had dipped behind the far tree line maybe 10 minutes earlier, leaving that in-between light where everything looks washed out and flat. My fields stretched out in long, quiet rows of early summer corn, the tassels barely showing. I just shut off the tractor and was rolling the door closed when movement down the driveway caught my eye. 2 kids, walking calmly toward the house like they belonged there. At first I thought maybe they were from the Thompson place a few miles down, but those kids were younger and rarely wandered off. These 2 looked older, maybe 10 or 11. A boy and a girl walking side by side in perfect step. They weren't rushing. They weren't lost. Just approaching. I stepped out from the shed, wiping my hands on a rag. "Evenin'," I called. "You folks need help?" They didn't stop until they were about 20 feet away. Close enough for me to see their clothes were too thin for the cool evening. Dark shirts, dark pants, stiff like old uniforms. There was something clean and strange about them, like they hadn't been outside long enough to get dusty or sweaty. The girl spoke first. "Can we wait in the barn?" Her voice was soft and monotone, not nervous or shy, just flat. I frowned. "Wait for what?" "The arrival," the boy said. His tone matched hers exactly. I gave a dry laugh, partly because the alternative was getting creeped out. "You mean your parents? Are they coming to pick you up?" The 2 kids simply stared at me, not blinking, not shifting, just staring. The driveway gravel was still warm under my boots. The air was still. Even the cicadas had quieted down, which struck me as odd. Usually around sunset, the whole farm buzzes like a generator. "Look," I said, taking a step closer, "nobody should be walking out here this late. You know how far the road is? Couple miles at least. Tell me where you came from. I'll get you home." The girl looked up toward the sky, her head lifting in this smooth, unnatural arc. "They're close," she said. Right then, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't anything like thunder. It was more like pressure shifting, like the air thickened around us. The hairs on my arms rose. My ears popped softly, as if a storm front had rolled through all at once. The boy turned his head toward the cornfields. "It's starting." Before I could ask what he meant, the sky above my north field lit up. A pale blue glow, soft at first, spread like a silent curtain over the crops. It wasn't coming from the ground. It wasn't coming from the horizon. It was just there, hanging above the field like mist catching moonlight, except the moon wasn't even up yet. The corn shimmered under it, the tips of the stalks glowing faintly. No sound, no heat, just a huge wash of blue light sweeping across my land, too bright to be natural, but too soft to be anything mechanical. I instinctively stepped backward, closer to the kids. "What is that?" I said aloud, though I didn't expect an answer. Neither of them looked up at the light. Neither flinched. They just watched me. That's when I noticed their eyes. Black, completely, solid, no reflections, no whites, just dark, glossy nothingness staring out of two pale faces. My throat tightened. "Okay, that's enough. You kids need to come inside so we can call." I turned toward them fully, and they were gone. Not walking away, not hiding behind anything, just gone. The driveway stretched empty in front of me, the gravel lightly disturbed only where they'd been standing a second earlier. The blue glow pulsed once above the corn, brighter this time, lighting the field like daylight for a split second. Then it dimmed to a soft haze again. My heart hammered in my chest, and every part of me wanted to back away from the field, from the barn, from everything. But I forced myself to look around to make sure those kids hadn't run off toward the tree line or the equipment shed. Something caught my eye near the edge of the corn. Footprints, small ones, 2 sets, leading straight into the tall stalks. No other marks, no crushed weeds suggesting they went back out. Just a clean path of small impressions disappearing into the rows. I stood there staring, waiting to hear something. Footsteps, rustling, whispers, anything that would make sense of it. Nothing came. The blue glow flickered again overhead, rippling like it was pushed by a breeze I couldn't feel. It rolled across the tops of the stalks, making them take on a faint metallic sheen. My breath came out shaky. I took one slow step backward, then another. I didn't turn around until I was halfway to the house. When I looked over my shoulder at the field one last time, the light vanished. Not faded, vanished. Like someone had flipped a switch. Darkness dropped over the land again. The cicadas resumed chirping. A frog croaked somewhere by the pond. The world snapped back to normal in a way that felt almost more frightening. I walked into the house and locked the door immediately, though I couldn't have explained why. I kept the lights off for a while, just listening to the wind outside, trying to convince myself the kids had gone home and the light had been some kind of atmospheric fluke. About half an hour later, I went back out with a flashlight to check the driveway, forcing myself to look, even though everything in me said not to. The footprints were still there, but they only went inward. Not a single one came back out. I followed them just far enough to reach the first row of corn. The beam from my flashlight stopped cold at the wall of stalks, unable to penetrate more than a few feet. Something deep in there rustled. One quick, sharp movement. I froze, breath held. Silence returned. I backed away slowly, not turning until I was back on the gravel. I shut the house door again and didn't open it for the rest of the night. The next morning, the footprints were gone. Wind could have filled them in, I guess. Or maybe the irrigation runoff. I tried telling myself that. But the ground wasn't muddy, and there'd been no wind. And right at the edge of the first row, one single stalk of corn was bent sharply at the base, like something small had gripped it hard on its way in. I still check the driveway every evening at sunset, scanning for any shapes walking toward the house. I don't know what I'd do if I saw those kids again, but I know I wouldn't let them anywhere near the barn. I rolled up to the intersection a little before midnight. It was one of those four-way stops in the middle of nowhere. Just 2 long country roads crossing each other with a single blinking red light hanging from a wire. I'd been driving home from my cousin's place after helping him pack up some equipment for his landscaping business. It was a long, quiet drive, and I hadn't seen another car in miles. The night was clear and cold. One of those nights where the stars look sharp enough to poke through the darkness. My heater hummed low, and the cab smelled faintly like the coffee I'd spilled earlier. I remember feeling tired but calm, just wanting to get home, get in bed, and not think about anything. As I eased up to the stop sign, I saw them. 2 kids standing on the edge of the crosswalk on my right side. I hit the brake harder than necessary because the sight of them shocked me. 2 figures, small, still standing like they'd been dropped there. A boy and a girl. They faced my truck, not the road, like they'd been waiting for someone to show up. The blinking red light overhead cast a dull pulse across the intersection. Every time it flashed, the kids lit up, then sank into darkness again. The effect was strange, like they were fading in and out of existence. I cracked my window halfway, just enough to talk without letting the cold air flood the whole cab. "You kids okay?" I called, leaning slightly toward the passenger side. The boy stepped forward, not quickly, just a small, precise motion. "Can we watch the lights from inside your car?" His voice was monotone, completely flat. I frowned. "What lights? You mean the stoplight?" The girl shook her head slowly. "The big lights." Her voice was the same, calm, steady, emotionless, almost rehearsed. I glanced up at the blinking red bulb above us out of instinct. It flickered at its usual rhythm. Nothing else was up there. No headlights in the distance, no planes crossing overhead, no lightning. "Sorry, I don't know what you mean," I said. "Are you lost? Do you need?" The boy took another step toward the truck. I hadn't noticed it before, but something about them looked wrong. Their clothes were too thin for the cold, dark shirts and pants that looked more like uniforms than normal kids' clothes. Their hair didn't move in the slight breeze. Their faces were pale under the blinking light. And when the red flashed again, I caught a direct look at their eyes. Black, every part of them. No whites, no shine, nothing reflecting the streetlight. My hand tightened around the steering wheel. The girl lifted her chin, almost as if she sensed the change in my breathing. "We just want to watch the lights," she said again. I don't think that's a good idea," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's late. You should head home. Dad, or look, I can call someone for you." The boy cocked his head slightly, the motion small and deliberate. "They're almost here." "Who?" I asked. That's when the air changed. I didn't hear anything at first. I just felt it. Like pressure shifting, a subtle tightening that made my ears ring faintly. Daisy, my dog, wasn't with me this time, but if she had been, I know she would have been whining. The windshield seemed to vibrate, just barely, like something was humming in the distance. The kids both turned their heads upward toward the sky at the exact same time. My instincts made me look too. A flash erupted, not lightning, not headlights, not anything I'd ever seen. It was huge, white, sharp, blinding, washing out the stars like someone had switched on a spotlight the size of a football field. It came from above, but not from any specific point. It was everywhere and nowhere, lighting up the entire intersection like midday for half a second. I threw my arm up to shield my eyes. The flash was silent. No boom, no crack, no hum. Just light. When it faded, the darkness rushed back in so fast it made me dizzy. Spots danced across my vision. I blinked hard several times, trying to clear them, and when I finally lowered my arm and looked toward the crosswalk, the kids were gone. Not walking away, not crossing the street, just gone. The sidewalk was empty. The crosswalk was empty. The spot where they'd stood was clear. I scanned the area with my headlights, leaning over to check both sides of the road. Nothing. The asphalt gleamed faintly from the dew gathering on it, but there were no footprints, no shadows, no movement. The blinking red light above swung gently on its wire, perfectly normal again. I rolled down the window all the way and listened. Silence. Then, after several seconds, a soft buzzing drifted through the air. Not loud, not close, but steady. It rose for a few seconds, then faded. It then returned, each time shifting direction slightly, like it was moving through the hills surrounding the road. I looked up again, searching for anything, planes, drones, reflections, anything that could explain the flash or the sound. The sky was black and empty. The stars had returned. I put the truck in gear and eased slowly through the intersection, heart hammering in my chest. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting the kids to reappear, standing somewhere in the periphery. Nothing showed up. A few miles down the road, my radio crackled with static, just for a second, then went silent again. The buzzing outside faded completely, leaving me alone with the hum of the engine and my own breathing. I didn't stop again until I reached town. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a minute in the dark, listening to the cooling engine tick. My hands were shaking. Not violently, just this subtle trembling I couldn't control. I checked the sky one more time before going inside. No flashes, no shapes, just the regular night sky I'd known my whole life. But the image of those kids, standing under the blinking red light, asking to watch the big lights from inside my car that stayed in my mind long after. And sometimes late at night when I'm stopped at an empty intersection, I catch myself scanning the crosswalks without even thinking, just in case. I was about a half mile from Eric's cabin when it happened. It was late October, cold enough that my breath came out in thin streams, but not cold enough for real frost. I'd parked my car at the trailhead because the road had gotten too rough for the sedan, and I figured the walk would do me good. It was a quiet, moonless night, just the crunch of my boots on the dirt road and the occasional rustle of branches. Eric had been staying up at the cabin all week, working on a photography project, and he'd invited me to come spend the weekend. No cell service, no neighbors, no noise. I'd only walked the road once before during the day, so it looked different at night. The trees leaned in more, and the shadows seemed thicker than they should have been. I'd just rounded a bend when I saw them. Two kids standing in the middle of the dirt road. I stopped immediately. They were about 20 feet ahead, facing each other, whispering so quietly that I couldn't make out a single word. Their voices blended into the air like static. One looked like a boy, short hair, thin, maybe 10, and the other a girl, a little taller, maybe 11 or 12. They wore dark jackets and pants, too thin for the chill. I cleared my throat to let them know I was coming. "Hey there, you kids okay?" They stopped whispering. They didn't look at me right away. Instead, they lifted their heads in the same slow, smooth motion, like they were mechanical or had rehearsed it. When their faces oriented toward me fully, something in my chest tightened. Their eyes weren't reflecting the faint starlight like eyes should. They were just dark, flat, like looking at polished stone. The boy spoke first. "Do you feel it?" His voice was quiet and even. "Feel what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone calm. The woods were already making me uneasy, and the situation didn't help. "The shaking in the sky," the girl said. I glanced upward instinctively. The canopy was mostly blocking my view, but through gaps in the branches I could see a slice of star-speckled darkness. Nothing was moving. No planes, no clouds, nothing. "I don't feel anything," I said. "Look, are you guys lost? I'm headed to my friend's cabin. Maybe I can call someone for you." They turned their heads toward each other again, almost perfectly synchronized, as if sharing some silent message I wasn't supposed to understand. Then the air shifted. Not the wind, the air itself. For a moment, the world felt like it paused, like the woods were holding their breath. Then the treetops rippled. All at once, like a wave rolled across them, bending and swaying as though something massive passed above the canopy. But the air around me stayed still, completely still. No breeze touched my face, no rustle brushed my jacket, nothing moved at ground level. The trees reacted to something I couldn't sense. The shaking wasn't loud. It was more like a deep vibration traveling from the sky downward, vibrating through the upper branches but not affecting the ground. The sound, or whatever it was, seemed to stretch across the whole forest, then fade into nothing. I stood frozen, staring up, trying to understand how the treetops could move without wind. My heart raced, but I forced myself to look back toward the kids. They were stepping off the road, not quickly, not running, just calmly walking backward toward the tree line, their eyes still locked on me. Their feet made no sound on the dirt, their shoulders didn't sway. They moved like figures being pulled on tracks. "Wait," I said, taking a step forward. "Hold on a second. Are you sure you're okay? Do you have a cabin nearby?" They didn't answer. The boy lifted a hand and pointed toward the trees behind him. "We have to go before it comes back." His words were so soft I barely caught them. Before I could respond, they slipped into the trees. No rustling branches, no snapping twigs, no sound at all. I reached the spot where they'd stepped off the road within seconds. The undergrowth was thick, ferns, low brush, fallen branches. But there were no footprints, no marks, no movement deeper in the woods, just the usual darkness layered between trunks. I shined my flashlight into the trees. The beam cut through only a few yards before dissolving into blackness. "Hello," I called. "Kids?" Silence. The woods were back to normal, except my pulse was racing and my hands felt colder than the night air. I tried listening for running footsteps, but all I got was the distant creak of trees shifting and settling. The treetops were still again, no sign of the ripple that had passed through them seconds earlier. After a full minute of staring into the woods, I had to force myself to step away. There was nothing else I could do. I didn't have a phone signal. I didn't know their names or where they'd come from. The only thing I knew was that the whole situation was wrong. I kept walking toward Eric's cabin, picking up my pace without meaning to. Every now and then, I glanced behind me, half expecting the kids to be standing on the road again, watching. They never appeared. But twice, maybe 3 times, I heard that same faint vibration overhead. Not loud, not even clear. Just a subtle tremor that made the treetops shiver while the air stayed still around me. I didn't see anything in the sky. No lights, no movement. Nothing my eyes could latch onto. Just that strange, deep shaking that seemed too big and too quiet at the same time. By the time the cabin's lights came into view, I was practically jogging. Eric opened the door as soon as I knocked. "You made it," he said. "Everything okay? You look like you ran the whole way." "I'm fine," I said automatically, brushing past him. "Just cold." He offered me a beer, but I shook my head. I sat on the couch, rubbing my hands together, still feeling the phantom sensation of the ground not reacting while the sky did. Eric kept asking if something happened on the road, but I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. Later, when the generator cut for a moment, a normal thing, according to Eric, I jerked so hard I spilled my water. The house rattled, just slightly, like a truck had passed nearby, though the cabin was miles from the highway. Eric laughed it off, but my heart thudded against my ribs because for a second, I thought I felt that same faint shake I'd heard on the road. We stayed up until after 1, but I didn't tell him what I'd seen. The next morning, I walked back down the dirt road alone, checking the spot where I'd seen the kids. No footprints, no signs of anyone walking there. The undergrowth, where they vanished, looked untouched. I kept going back to that moment when the treetops rippled, bending in a wave while the ground didn't move at all. I kept thinking about how the kids looked at each other, whispering things I couldn't hear, and the way they stepped backward into the trees like they weren't afraid of anything in there. I haven't walked that road at night again, and every time I hear wind hit the treetops but not the ground, even faintly, my stomach knots. I was waiting for the 11:12 northbound at Brookhaven Station, the last train of the night that would still get me home before midnight. The platform was nearly empty, just the usual stragglers heading back from late shifts. It was one of those early winter nights where the cold sinks in quietly and even the fluorescent lights seemed tired, flickering slightly at the edges. I remember checking my phone and seeing the train was delayed 12 minutes. Not unusual, not at that hour. I tucked my hands deeper into my coat and paced a little to stay warm. Across the tracks, the far platform was completely empty. Behind it was just a long stretch of dark tree line and the faint outline of the old maintenance road that paralleled the tracks for a mile or so. I didn't notice the kids at first. It was when I sat down on the metal bench that I realized they were standing a few yards to my left. A boy and a girl. Maybe 10 or 11. They weren't talking to each other, they weren't moving at all. They were just standing there perfectly still, both of them looking straight up at the sky. Not glancing, not watching their breath in the cold air, just staring upward, like they were waiting for something to descend. I tried to ignore them, the way you ignore anything strange at a train station that isn't directly your problem. But there was something about their stillness that made it impossible. People, especially kids, don't hold themselves that way. Their posture was too rigid, like they didn't get tired or bored or cold. After a minute or two, the boy pivoted his head slightly toward me, but his eyes stayed on the sky. "Did you see it?" he asked. His voice was quiet but clear. Not scared, not excited, just matter of fact. I looked up automatically. "See what?" "The object," the girl said without lowering her gaze. "The one that followed the tracks." Her voice matched his exactly. Same tone, same rhythm, as if they'd rehearsed the line 1,000 times. I blinked at them, confused, and looked down the tracks in both directions. Nothing but the dim signal lights and the darkness beyond them. "I haven't seen anything," I said. "You two waiting for someone? You shouldn't be out here alone this late." Neither of them responded. They just kept searching the sky. A gust of cold wind swept down the tracks, carrying that metallic smell you sometimes get near train yards. The overhead lights flickered again, a little harder this time, like the power was struggling. That's when the air changed. I didn't hear anything at first, but I felt something, like a vibration moving through the rails. A subtle tremor under my feet, not enough to shake the platform, but enough to make me notice. I crouched slightly, instinctively listening for a train, but there was no rumbling, no horn, no distant engine hum, just that faint vibration. The boy spoke again. "There it is." I followed his gaze, not upward this time, but down the long stretch of track toward the south curve. And then it happened. A bright light, white, sharp, silent, raced along the rails. It wasn't a train. It wasn't shaped like one, eh? It didn't move like one. It didn't sound like anything mechanical. It was just a streak of light, hugging the track line perfectly, shooting toward the station faster than any train I'd ever seen. It didn't cast shadows the way headlights should. It washed everything out instead, like someone had dragged daylight along the ground at impossible speed. The wind didn't pick up, the rails didn't clatter, the platform didn't shake. The light made no sound at all. It slowed as it neared the station, not stopped, just decelerated enough for me to get a clear look at it. Or maybe look isn't the right word. It was bright enough that I couldn't make out a shape, only the way it clung to the track, like it was riding on top of it. For a second, the entire platform glowed an unreal white blue. Then the light shot past and vanished around the next curve, silent as ever. The afterimage burned in my vision. I blinked hard, spots dancing across everything. When the world finally settled back into its normal dim colors, I turned immediately toward the kids. They were gone. Not walking away, not stepping onto the train tracks, just gone. The platform was empty except for me. I stood up so fast, the bench scraped against the concrete. My first instinct was to scan the far end of the platform, then the stairs leading to the street, then the tracks themselves. Nothing. They couldn't have disappeared that quickly. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run without me seeing them. The overhead lights flickered again, softer this time, then steadied. The vibration under the rails faded as if it had never been there. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined everything. The kids, the light, the soundless rush along the tracks. But the brightness still lingered in my eyes, and the cold metal railing beside me was warm to the touch where the light had passed closest. My phone buzzed. The train was arriving in 2 minutes. When it pulled into the station, the headlights cast ordinary cones of light across the tracks. The screech of metal and the rumble of the engine felt almost comforting, too normal to be connected to whatever I had just seen. I got on. I didn't say anything to the conductor or the one other passenger in my car. I sat down, stared at my own reflection in the window, and watched the dark shapes of trees and warehouses slide by. At one point, maybe 10 minutes into the ride, the lights inside the car dimmed for half a second. Barely noticeable. No one else reacted. The train moved on like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Every time a car passed outside my window or a plane blinked across the sky, I found myself looking a little too long, waiting for something bright and silent to trace a path across the darkness. And sometimes when I'm standing on a quiet platform late at night, I still catch myself glancing upward, just like those kids did, most of me hoping I never see anything again, but a small part wondering if I will. I was sitting at the bus stop out on Old Quarry Road, the one with the crooked metal bench and the faded route sign that always looked like it was about to fall off. It was around 6:40 in the evening, late enough that the sky had gone that weird purple-blue color you only see in the countryside. I was heading back from my after-school job at the feed store, waiting for the last bus home before my mom started texting me nonstop. It was cold. Not freezing, but the kind of cold that made me tuck my hands into my sleeves. The road was empty in both directions, just fields on one side and woods on the other. No houses close by, no streetlights, just the one dim bulb inside the little shelter, flickering when the wind hit it. I didn't see the kids arrive. One second I was alone. The next there were two of them standing a few feet away. A boy and a girl, both young, maybe 10 or 11, both pale in a way that looked wrong for kids who should have been running around or playing outside. Their clothes were plain. Dark jackets, dark pants, nothing bright or patterned. They weren't even breathing hard, like they hadn't walked there. They were just suddenly present. I sat up a little straighter. Hey, I said, trying not to sound weird. You guys waiting for the bus too? The girl stepped closer. Her movements were slow, like she wasn't used to having to move her body. Does this bus go toward the light? She asked. Her voice wasn't nervous, but it wasn't curious either. It was flat, like she was asking out of obligation. The light? I repeated. What light? The boy looked up at the sky. His eyes stayed trained on it, unblinking. The one that follows the road. I followed his gaze, but all I saw were low clouds, thick and gray, glowing faintly with leftover daylight. You mean like headlights? I tried, feeling my chest tighten a little for reasons I couldn't explain. No, the girl said. The other light. I didn't know what to say to that. The air around us felt heavier than before, like it had gained weight. Even the usual evening breeze had stopped. Everything was too still. Are you too lost? I asked. Do your parents know where you are? They didn't react. The bench creaked slightly as I shifted. The girl took another step closer, and when the bus shelter light flickered above us, I saw her eyes clearly for the first time. Black, not dark brown, black, fully. No whites, no reflections. Just two flat voids staring in my direction, though not exactly at me, more like past me. My heart thumped so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood up without meaning to. Listen, I don't think this is the right bus stop, for the pavement hummed. It started faint, like a vibration running through the soles of my shoes. I thought at first it was a truck coming from down the road, but there was no engine noise, no lights, nothing moving. The hum grew stronger. The metal bench rattled against the concrete slab. The loose sign above us buzzed like it was going to shake free. The air felt charged, like static before a storm, but there was no wind. Not even a stray leaf moved. The boy's head tilted slightly upward. It's arriving, he said. A deep pressure pulsed upward from the ground, not painful, but overwhelming, like standing too close to an enormous speaker playing a sound below human hearing. Then the sky brightened. A soft glow formed behind the clouds. It wasn't moonlight. The moon wasn't out. It wasn't lightning either. It was steady, growing, spreading across the cloud cover like a giant lamp was being lowered above the whole road. The girl looked up, her face calm. It sees us. I stumbled backward, staring at the clouds. The glow intensified, turning the entire sky above us into a pale, artificial-looking sheet of white. The brightness didn't bleed to the horizon. It was concentrated right over the bus stop, right over the road. My breath came out in quick bursts. I squinted against the glare, feeling the hum travel up my legs and into my chest. Then the light blinked out. Not dimmed, not faded. Blink. Gone. Instant silence replaced the humming. The air relaxed. The bench stopped vibrating. The night returned like someone flipped a switch. I blinked hard, trying to get my eyes to adjust. Spots floated across my vision. My pulse pounded so loudly it was all I could hear. When my sight cleared, I turned to the kids. They weren't there. Not walking away. Not hiding behind the shelter. Not anywhere. Just gone. The space beside the bench was empty. The patch of dirt in front of the shelter was undisturbed. There was no sound in the fields or the woods. Nothing. I walked out into the road, turning in a full circle, half expecting them to reappear. The darkness felt different, emptier, like something had just moved through and left everything hollow behind it. My bus didn't come for another 8 minutes. I spent the whole time standing in the middle of the road, staring at the sky, waiting for another flash I hoped wouldn't happen. When the bus finally arrived, the driver looked at me funny. "You all right? Looks like you've seen a ghost." I mumbled something about the lights flickering and took a seat. The bus shook normally when it hit bumps, but every vibration made me jump. At home, I told my mom the bus was just late. I didn't mention the kids, or the humming, or the light. But the next morning, when I walked past that bus stop on my way to school, I noticed something odd. The metal bench had shifted 3 inches to the left. I could see the clean outline in the dirt where it used to be. No one had been out there during the night. No trucks, no workers, and the bench was too heavy to push easily. It bolted into the slab. I still wait for the bus there sometimes, but I don't sit on the bench anymore. And every time the sky looks cloudy, I keep my eyes down. I was out in Garrison County that afternoon, taking photos of abandoned places for a project I'd been working on. The air was crisp, cold enough that my fingers stung a little when I took my gloves off to adjust lenses, but not so cold that I couldn't work. The old St. Brigid's Church sat at the end of a dirt road that had probably last been graded in the 90s. The roof had partially collapsed, and the steeple leaned like it was tired of holding itself up. Perfect for the kind of atmospheric shots I wanted. I parked beside what used to be a gravel lot and walked up to the entrance. The front doors were long gone, just empty frames with rusted hinges. Dust and old leaves coated the floor inside, but the structure still felt solid enough to explore. A long row of broken pews lined both sides, and the sunlight came through gaps in the roof, leaving stripes on the boards. I started shooting right away. Angles of the beams, the old stained glass shards, the warped floorboards. My footsteps echoed faintly, giving the place a hollow, low sound that followed me around. I didn't notice the kids at first. It wasn't until I walked deeper toward the front, where the altar used to be, that I heard something, a soft shuffle like fabric brushing wood. I swung my flashlight to the left out of instinct. 2 kids were standing in the nave, a boy and a girl. Around 10 or so, they stood side by side, both of them staring straight up at the ceiling, where a huge hole had opened in the roof. Bits of old shingles and splintered wood ringed the edges of the opening. Through it, I could see a gray-blue sky. I paused, lowering my camera. "Hey," I called out, trying not to sound startled. "Did you 2 come in with your parents? This place isn't really safe." They didn't respond, didn't even look at me. They kept staring upward, completely still, no shifting feet, no looking around the room, no reaction to someone suddenly talking behind them. I cleared my throat and stepped closer. "Kids, are you okay?" The girl spoke without moving her head. "Are you waiting for the Watchers too?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. "The who?" The boy finally lowered his gaze, turning his face toward me. His movement was too slow, too smooth. "The Watchers," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "You came early." I took a step back without meaning to. Something about their expression, no curiosity, no confusion, just this blank expectation, made my stomach tighten. "I'm just here taking photos," I said. "You shouldn't be in here without adults. It's dangerous." They didn't move, didn't answer. I thought about getting them out immediately, taking them by the hand, walking them outside, but something about them stopped me, a heaviness, or maybe hesitation. It felt like if I touched them, something would be wrong. The girl lifted her hand and pointed upward. "It's almost time." I followed her finger and looked up through the hole in the roof. Nothing unusual at first, just the sky, a few pale clouds drifting. Then the light changed. It brightened. Not like the sun coming out from behind a cloud. This was sharper. A white glare poured down through the opening, focused and narrow, like a spotlight shining straight into the church. It hit me square in the eyes, enough to make me squint and take a step back. The light didn't illuminate the walls or the floor. It was targeted, a vertical shaft so bright it looked solid. There was no sound, no rushing wind, no cracking beams, no rumble of machinery. Just that intense beam of white light spilling down from a sky that looked empty a moment before. I shielded my eyes with one arm and stepped behind a pew. "Hey, get away from that," I called to the kids, trying to see them through the glare. "Move back." The light flickered once like a shutter closing and opening, and then it was gone, instantly. The church fell back into its dim, dusty quiet, the stripes of normal sunlight returning through the roof gaps. I lowered my arm, blinking away after images. I looked back to where the kids had been standing. They were gone, not hiding behind a pew, not running toward the door, just gone. I walked straight to the spot where they'd been. The dust on the floor wasn't disturbed. No footprints, no small shoe prints leading toward the aisle or the entrance. The air was still cold and heavy with that old book smell abandoned churches always seem to have. I circled the whole nave, calling out, "Hello," and "Kids, where'd you go?" But my voice echoed back at me with nothing else behind it. I even checked behind the fallen beams and looked between the pews. Nothing. I stepped out into the aisle, trying to reason through it. Maybe they slipped out while the light blinded me. Maybe they lived nearby and used this place as a hideout. But the church was open enough that I should have heard footsteps, even light ones. I walked outside and circled the exterior. The dirt around the building had thin patches of old grass, but no footprints, no trail, no broken brush. I stood there a long minute, staring up at the roof. The sky was calm again, pale clouds drifting lazily, nothing above the church. No plane trails, no glint of anything metallic, just a quiet evening sky. Eventually, I packed up my camera gear and got back in the car. My hands shook a little as I put the key in the ignition. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see those two kids standing somewhere behind me. On the drive back into town, the roads looked different. Emptier. Even the radio flickered with static twice, which almost never happens out there. I went through the photos when I got home, checking every frame from the church. The shots looked normal. Broken beams, dust-filled sunlight, rotting pews. Nothing unusual. The spot where the kids had stood looked empty in every image. And the only photo of the hole in the roof showed an unremarkable patch of sky. There was no trace of that glaring light. No sign anyone else had been in the church with me. I still don't know where those kids came from or how they vanished silently on old wooden floors. I don't know what they meant by watchers or why they thought I was waiting for them. All I know is that every time I look at old churches now, especially ones with holes in the roof, I catch myself staring a little too long at the sky above them, waiting for a flash that never comes. I had just shut off the last set of lights and locked the side door when I noticed them sitting on the steps. Two kids, maybe 10 or 11, sitting shoulder to shoulder on the top concrete slab outside the main entrance. The library had closed 20 minutes earlier, and it was one of those quiet March evenings where the whole town felt empty. Most of Main Street had already gone dark except for the diner sign flickering down the block. I stopped halfway through, turning the key in the front door. "Hey," I called gently, trying not to spook them. "You two waiting for someone?" "We're closed." They both lifted their heads at the same time, like they shared one neck between them. Their faces were pale in the glow of the single parking lot lamp, which buzzed every so often like it was struggling to stay lit. The girl, the one on the left, tilted her head slightly. "Did you hear the signal?" I frowned. "What signal?" "The one that came through the clouds," the boy said. His voice didn't match the look on his face. Too calm. No kid talks like that. It was very clear. I looked up on instinct. The sky was low and overcast, a heavy layer of clouds lit faintly by the town's streetlights. Nothing unusual, just gray and thick. "I didn't hear anything," I said. "Did something happen? Are you trying to get home?" They didn't answer. They both stared up like they were waiting for something else to happen. I tried to follow their gaze, scanning the clouds again. All I heard was the wind moving weakly between the buildings, the soft clicking of the cooling library HVAC units, and somewhere far off, a truck on the highway. I took a step toward them. "Do you need help calling your parents?" The buzzing from the parking lot lamp went silent. Just off. And in that moment, right as the sudden quiet settled around us, a tone cut through the air. A high, piercing sound like someone running a fingertip around the rim of a glass bowl, but sharper. Clear. It lasted maybe a second and a half, total. Then it stopped. The wind returned. The normal sounds came back. I froze where I stood. My ears rang. The kids lowered their heads in perfect sync and looked at me. "That was it," the girl said. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't know what I was supposed to say. I glanced up again, half expecting some kind of plane or weather thing or, I don't know. Something. There was nothing. Just the same flat, heavy clouds. The kids stood. Not like tired kids dragging themselves upright. They rose straight up, smoothly, like they were lifting themselves together. Their movements matched exactly. First the shift forward, then the straightening of their legs, then the way they placed their hands at their sides. I took another step back toward the door without meaning to. "Hang on," I said quietly. "Where are your parents?" They didn't answer me. They started walking side by side down the steps. Their footsteps were nearly silent on the concrete. They moved past me without looking my way, their eyes fixed on the far corner of the building where the sidewalk wrapped toward the alley. "Wait," I said again, more firmly this time. "I can help if you're lost." The boy paused for half a second. He turned his head, not toward me, but toward the sky beyond the library roof. His eyes were so dark I couldn't tell where he was actually looking. No glimmer of light reflecting back. No visible iris, just black. The girl's eyes were the same. I didn't breathe for several seconds. I don't know why, but seeing that detail, really noticing it, hit me in a way none of the other weirdness had. Something in my mind tried to explain it away. Contacts, shadows, the streetlight angle, but none of that fit. Before I could say anything else, they walked around the corner together, still in that strange, perfectly matched stride. I hesitated only a moment before hurrying after them. Part of me felt responsible. Part of me just needed them to be normal kids with a weird sense of humor, and for all of this to make sense again. The library's brick wall stretched along the sidewalk, and I rounded the corner fast enough that my shoes scraped on the concrete. The alley was empty. No kids, no voices, no footsteps. Just the dumpsters, the recycling bins, and the back door that only staff used. It wasn't a long alley either, maybe 30 feet. If they'd run, I would have heard it. If they'd kept walking, I would have seen them at the end of it. There was nowhere else for them to go unless they ducked behind a dumpster. But I checked. Nothing. I walked slowly back toward the corner, heart pounding in my throat. The whole town felt muted. Even the diner sign had finally gone dead, leaving Main Street washed in the cold glow of a few old lamps. The parking lot light next to the library flickered, buzzed hard once, then steadied again. I finished locking the front door and took a long look at the steps. A thin layer of dust from the construction next door usually settled there, light enough to show footprints. But the concrete was smooth, no prints, no smudges, nothing disturbed. I forced myself to walk to my car. My hands shook so badly I dropped my keys once. The inside of the car smelled like old coffee, and the cleaner we used at work, familiar and normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling I'd brought something with me. Not physically, but like something was hovering just out of sight, waiting for me to acknowledge it. As I reversed out of the lot, the radio cut out for half a second, dead silent, then came back with a burst of static before settling into the usual late-night talk show. I shut it off immediately. I didn't see anyone else on the drive home. Not a single pedestrian, not a single car, just empty streets. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat for a moment before getting out. I looked up at the sky again, not expecting anything exactly, but unable to stop myself. The clouds hung low and unmoving, the same dull gray blanket as before. No lights, no tones, nothing strange. But when I closed my front door behind me and leaned against it, letting the quiet of the house surround me, I realized something. My ears were still ringing, just faintly, right at the edge of hearing, like the tone from earlier had left a trace behind. I tried to sleep that night, but kept waking every hour, convinced I heard something outside, a subtle hum, a flicker of movement, a shift in the air. The next morning, everything was normal again. Cars on the street, kids walking to school, people talking loudly in the coffee shop next door. I unlocked the library at 9 and pretended the previous night never happened. I didn't see those kids again. But sometimes when I close up and the parking lot lamp flickers and the town gets too quiet and the clouds hang low over Main Street, I think about the way they asked their question, as if they expected me to say yes. I pulled into the Overlook, mostly because my legs were cramping. I'd been driving since late afternoon, heading from Boone down toward Asheville, and the winding mountain roads always wore me out more than I expected. By the time I reached the turnout, the sun had already dipped behind the ridge, and the valley below was dark except for a few scattered porch lights way off in the distance. The Overlook was empty. No other cars, no hikers, no one taking pictures. Just my headlights sweeping across the wooden guardrail and the informational sign about the altitude. I killed the engine and stepped out, stretching until my back cracked. That's when I noticed the kids. Two of them, leaning against the guardrail a little to the left of the sign. A boy and a girl, both maybe 11 or 12. They were facing the valley, not moving, not talking, just staring down into the dark like they were waiting for something to happen. I hadn't seen them when I pulled in. They weren't near my headlights. They must have been standing perfectly still in the shadows. The thought made me uneasy without me knowing why. "Hey," I said, trying to sound friendly. "You guys out here alone?" Neither of them turned around. Their posture didn't change at all. I stepped a little closer, hands shoved in my jacket pockets. The temperature had dropped fast, and the air had that sharp mountain bite to it. I couldn't imagine any parent letting their kids stand around in the cold like this. "You two okay?" I asked. They both turned their heads toward me at the same time. Not quickly, not jerkily, just too perfectly matched. The girl spoke first. "Did you feel it?" "Feel what?" I asked. "The dip in the sky," the boy said. "When the stars shifted." I let out a nervous half laugh. I must have missed that." The girl pointed upward without looking away from me. "They moved wrong." I followed her gesture, glancing up at the sky. The stars were bright, clearer than I'd seen in weeks. The Milky Way stretched across the darkness, sharp and almost glittering. Nothing looked out of place. I didn't know what dip in the sky was supposed to mean. "I think everything's where it should be," I said. "You guys camping around here or something?" "We were waiting," the boy said. "For who?" They didn't answer. They both turned back toward the valley in the same slow but synchronized motion. I stood there for a moment, not sure what to do, shifting my weight from foot to foot. The wind picked up and blew across the overlook hard enough that I zipped my jacket to my chin. The kids didn't react to the cold at all. No shivering, no shoulders hunched up, nothing. "Look," I said finally, "if you're lost, I can call someone. Park rangers or..." The girl interrupted me. "Watch." I didn't know if she meant her, or the valley, or the sky. I followed their gaze down toward the trees anyway. At first, everything looked normal. The forest spread out below us like a dark ocean. No movement, no sound except the wind. Then something changed. A faint line of light appeared across the treetops. Not bright, just a pale, shimmering band, like someone had laid a glowing thread across the ridge. It stretched from left to right, too straight to be moonlight, too even to be headlights or a spotlight. It hovered there for a moment, unmoving. Then it rippled. The ripple traveled across the forest like a heat wave rising off asphalt, except it wasn't rising, it was moving horizontally, sliding along the tops of the trees with total silence. Every branch it passed seemed to waver, but the trees themselves didn't bend. It was like the air between me and the valley had shifted out of sync with itself. The hair on my arms stood up. "What is that?" I whispered. Neither kid spoke. The ripple continued across the valley, slow but steady, until it reached the far ridge and disappeared behind it. The light faded with it. The forest fell still again. I exhaled shakily. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath. When I turned to look at the kids, they were gone. Not walking away, not hiding behind the sign. Just gone. There was nowhere for them to go. The overlook was a flat semicircle of asphalt, with a guardrail on one side and a sheer drop into the valley on the other. My car was the only vehicle there. If they'd run, I would have heard their footsteps. If they ducked behind anything, I would have seen them. I stepped forward and looked over the guardrail, shining my phone flashlight down the rocky slope. Nothing. Just cliffs and trees and darkness. It wasn't the kind of place anyone, let alone two kids, could climb down without breaking bones. I backed away slowly, scanning the area again. The informational sign, the trash can, the asphalt turnout. Nothing moved. Nothing looked disturbed. My breath puffed in the air in shaky clouds. I walked back to my car, my eyes darting to every shadow like I expected one of the kids to step out. I unlocked the door and got inside, slamming it shut harder than I meant to. I sat there in the dark cabin of the car, hands gripping the wheel even though the engine wasn't on. The overlook outside felt too quiet, like the whole mountain was holding its breath. After a minute, I forced myself to start the car. The headlights lit up the empty turnout, the guardrail, the sign. No kids, no footprints, no movement. I pulled away slowly, checking the rear-view mirror again and again. The overlook shrank behind me until it disappeared around the bend. The rest of the drive down the mountain felt wrong in ways I couldn't explain. The stars looked normal, but every time the road curved and the treetops came into view, I kept expecting to see that ripple of light again. I didn't. But when I finally reached Asheville and checked into my motel, I turned off the lamp and caught myself looking out the window at the sky, as if something might shift again. I'd gone out to Alder Lake early that morning, hoping to get a few hours of quiet before the weekend crowd showed up. It was late January, cold enough that the air stung the inside of my nose, but the sky was clear. Bright blue, not a cloud anywhere. The lake froze thick every winter, thick enough that people drove their ATVs onto it, though I always stuck to walking. I set up toward the southeast end, where the pines thinned and the ice tended to stay smooth. I drilled my hole, set down my bucket, and settled onto it with my thermos of coffee. The only sounds were the faint creaks of the ice shifting and the occasional crow calling from the tree line. Pretty standard stuff. Maybe half an hour passed. I'd caught one small perch and let it go. I remember pouring the last of my coffee when I noticed movement on the far side of the lake. Two kids. They stood side by side near the edge of the tree line, facing me directly. A boy and a girl. Far enough that I couldn't make out their faces clearly, but close enough that I could tell they weren't dressed right for the cold. Thin jackets, no hats, no gloves, just standing there on the ice like it didn't bother them. I frowned and squinted at them, shielding my eyes from the reflection off the snow. Nobody else was supposed to be out there that early, and there were no vehicles or sleds nearby that could have brought them. They weren't waving, weren't playing, weren't moving at all. I raised a hand awkwardly, giving a little wave to show I wasn't some threat. "Morning!" I shouted. My voice carried across the lake. They didn't react. I tried again. "You two okay? You shouldn't be out here alone." Nothing. They just stared. A weird, prickling feeling crawled up my back. Something about how still they were. Kids that age don't stand that still. They twitch, they stomp around, they yell. These two looked like they were posing for a photograph. I stood up from the bucket, brushing frost from my jeans. I wasn't about to walk halfway across a frozen lake to check on two kids who obviously didn't want to talk, but I felt obligated to keep an eye on them at least. People could get hypothermia fast in weather like that. I had just started to call out one more time when the girl spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but I heard it like she was standing 5 feet from me instead of 100 yards. "Did you see the lights under the ice?" I blinked hard. "What?" The boy repeated it, same flat tone. "The lights. Underneath." I looked down at the hole I drilled. The lake was solid. The water below was dark. I'd been watching it on and off all morning. Nothing unusual under there besides a few lazy fish. "I haven't seen any lights," I called. "You sure you're not talking about someone's lantern or a reflector?" They didn't answer. They didn't even shift their weight. Just staring. A minute passed, maybe two. They never moved, never spoke again. The silence started to feel heavier, pushing against my ears. Even the crows had gone quiet. I crouched by my hole again, trying to shake the weird feeling. I figured if they were still there in a few minutes, I'd pack up and check on them. Maybe they were lost or something. That was when I noticed the water moving. It didn't slosh or bubble. It pulsed. A faint glow appeared beneath the surface, deep, diffuse, like a lantern wrapped in fog. It wasn't coming from my hole, it was coming from underneath the ice itself. A soft bluish-white spreading like a slow heartbeat. I staggered back, nearly kicking over my bucket. The glow expanded outward in a circular ripple, traveling under the ice like something huge was swimming below, except the ice didn't crack. It didn't melt, it didn't even shift. It just lit up from underneath, dull and muted but unmistakably real. The fish scattered instantly. I could see their shapes darting away through the hole, flashing silver in the sudden brightness. The glow pulsed once more, brighter this time, stretching maybe 20-30 feet under the surface, then faded out completely. The water stilled. My breath fogged in front of me as I stood frozen, waiting for something else to happen. The lake was silent again, too silent. Even the usual groaning of the ice seemed to have stopped. I forced myself to look up at the kids. They were gone, just gone. No walking away, no slow retreat into the trees. One blink, there. Next blink, gone. I jogged toward the spot where they'd been, slipping a few times on the packed snow. My boots crunched loudly, echoing across the lake. The tree line loomed quiet and dark, branches heavy with frost, but when I reached the edge, there were no footprints. None. The snow was untouched, smooth except for the thin scattering of pine needles. The ice near the shore had no marks, no signs of small boots pressing into it. It was like they'd never been there at all. My chest tightened. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the lake, half hoping they'd reappear so I could rationalize it somehow. Nothing. Just empty, frozen water stretching out as far as I could see. I stood there long enough that my fingers started to go numb. Eventually, I walked back to my gear, hands shaking worse than the cold should have caused. I packed up fast, barely managing to get everything in my bag. My eyes kept darting to my fishing hole, then to the tree line, then back to the lake's surface. Every time I thought I'd imagined the pulsing light, I'd remember the fish, how fast they'd scattered. Something had moved under there, something big. I didn't like the idea of being alone on the ice anymore. By the time I reached the trailhead, my breath was coming sharp and uneven. I got into my truck, blasted the heat, and sat there for a long minute without starting the engine. I kept replaying the moment the kids asked their question, and how clearly I had heard them across that distance, and how wrong their voices had sounded, flat, calm, too steady. When I finally did start the engine, the radio flickered with static for a full 5 seconds before settling into silence. I didn't tell anyone about it when I got home, just cleaned my gear, hung up my coat, and tried to go about my day. But the next morning when I checked the local weather cams online, I looked for Alder Lake out of curiosity. The camera overlooking the east end showed a normal frozen lake, except a section near the southeast end, right where I'd been, looked slightly brighter than the snow around it. Not melting, not cracked, just off, like something underneath had shined just long enough to leave a memory. I had just tied off my skiff when I noticed them. 2 kids standing at the far end of the pier, right where the boards darkened and dipped a little from age. It was just after 9 at night, mid-September, the kind of cool coastal evening where the wind cut through your sleeves even if the day had been warm. I'd spent the last few hours checking the crab pots and pulling in a few late-season rockfish near the jetty. Nothing unusual, pretty quiet run. The harbor was mostly shut down for the night. The seafood shack across the parking lot had gone dark, the bait shop had its lights off, and the only sound was the ocean pushing gently against the pilings below. The sodium lamps along the pier threw long orange reflections across the water. The kids weren't dressed for the weather. The boy had on what looked like a thin long-sleeve shirt, and the girl wore a sundress like it was July. They stood side by side, hands at their sides, staring straight down into the water. Not leaning over, not pointing, not talking, just staring like something down there had them frozen in place. I dragged my cooler off the boat and started stacking gear on the dock. I tried not to stare too much. Kids wandered around here sometimes, though usually with parents close behind. But these 2 didn't have anyone with them. Nothing about them matched the usual lost tourist kids vibe. I checked my watch. 9:13 p.m. "Hey," I called out, half raising a hand as I stepped onto the pier. "You folks all right down there?" They didn't turn at first. I couldn't even tell if they'd heard me. The wind lifted the girl's hair a little, but neither of them reacted. I walked a few steps closer. "Buddy, miss, your parents around?" That's when they turned, at the exact same moment. Not gradually, not like 2 kids responding to the same voice. It was synchronized, like someone hit a switch and they both pivoted toward me. Their faces were weirdly calm. No fear, no confusion, no annoyance at being addressed by a stranger, just blank. The kind of blank that made me slow down without even thinking about it. The girl spoke first, voice soft but clear. "Did you see the beam touch the sea?" I blinked. "What beam?" The boy stepped slightly forward, not enough to look like he was approaching me, just enough to make me notice. "The light under the water." I glanced down at the waves. They sloshed against the pylons in the usual slow, steady rhythm. Dark, normal, no light, no beam. I even wiped my glasses on my shirt in case the lenses were foggy. "No," I said, feeling uncertain in a way I couldn't explain. "Can't say I saw anything like that? You 2 sure you're all right?" They didn't answer. They turned back to the water in perfect sync and resumed staring. Something about the way they did it, the stillness, the quiet, made the whole area feel wrong. The wind had died down, the water seemed too calm. Even the distant gulls had gone silent. I kept unloading my stuff, glancing over now and then. The kids didn't move, not even a shift of weight or a scratch of the face. Nothing. I was almost unpacking the last of the gear into the dolly when the water changed. It didn't splash or bubble. It lit up. A pale white column, narrow, maybe 5 or 6 feet across, flashed upward from deep below the surface, like a spotlight shining up through the dark water. It flickered once, illuminating the undercurrent and the floating seaweed, and the whole harbor seemed to brighten for just a second. Then it was gone. The waves kept moving like nothing had happened. The reflections from the pier lights returned. No sound followed it. No rumble. No hum. Just that split-second beam, bright enough to see the shape of the seabed below, then darkness again. I stumbled backward and almost knocked over my dolly. "What? Did you see that?" I called instinctively toward the kids. When I looked up, they weren't there. The pier was empty. I walked quickly to the end, scanning the length of the boards. Nobody, no small figures running off, no silhouettes, just open space. I leaned over the rail, shining my phone flashlight down toward the rocks and waterline. Nothing. If they'd jumped, I would have heard a splash. If they'd run past me, I would have heard footsteps, and there was nowhere else to go. No ladders, no lower docks on that side. Just open water and the long stretch of boardwalk behind me. My skin prickled, and I rubbed my arms to shake off the weird cold creeping into them. "Hello?" I called again. "Kids?" My voice carried, but nothing answered. Not an echo, not a gull, not even the usual hum of the harbor power boxes. I walked slowly back down the pier toward the parking lot. Halfway down, the wind picked up again, strong enough to rattle the loose rigging on a sailboat tied nearby. The normal sounds returned like someone had turned the volume back up. The slap of waves against hulls, the groan of the pilings, the faint metal clinks from the boat masts. I stopped beside a coil of rope and looked back at the end of the pier. Still empty. My phone buzzed suddenly in my hand. Just a quick, sharp vibration. No text, no notification. Just a buzz, then a brief screen glitch where the brightness flickered down to 0 and back up again. That was enough to get me moving. I loaded the dolly into my truck bed and climbed into the cab, locking the doors out of pure instinct, even though I didn't know what I thought I was keeping out. I sat there for maybe a minute, staring at the far end of the pier. The orange lamplight flickered once, shivering across the water, then steadied. When I finally turned the key, the truck radio crackled with static for a solid 2 seconds before switching to the normal station. I turned it off immediately. I drove home slower than usual, checking the rearview mirror more often than I'd admit. Every street lamp seemed too bright, too sharp. Every puddle of water reflected the light in a way that reminded me of that beam. At home, I parked in the driveway and took one last look toward the harbor, even though it was miles away and completely out of sight. The weird thing was, I couldn't shake the feeling that if I'd stayed on that pier a little longer, the kids would have come back, and maybe the beam too. But I didn't go back. Not that night. And every time I unload gear after dark, now I make a point of checking the water first, just to be sure there's nothing glowing underneath. I was about a mile into my usual morning run when I first saw them. It was just after dawn, that pale gray light where the world isn't fully awake yet. The fog hadn't burned off either. It lay low along the river like a flat sheet drifting between the reeds and the rocks. I'd taken the trail that ran under the old railroad trestle, mostly because I liked the quiet there. The trains didn't run often anymore, and when they did, it was usually late afternoon. Under the trestle, the air always felt cooler. The metal beams overhead stretched across the river like a giant spine, rusted in places, wet from condensation. My footsteps echoed softly as I slowed to a jog under the beams. That's when I noticed the two kids. They stood side by side near one of the concrete footings, facing upward, staring at the underbelly of the bridge. A boy and a girl, maybe 10 or 11. Too young to be out here alone, too still, too silent. They weren't dressed for the morning chill. Thin hoodies, no hats, no gloves. I slowed to a stop a few yards away, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual. "You guys okay out here? Kinda early to be wandering around." They didn't turn, didn't flinch. They just kept staring up at the beams. I took a couple of steps closer, shoes crunching on the gravel. "Did you get separated from a group or something?" The girl spoke first, her voice quiet but clear. "Are you hiding from the watchers too?" I froze. "Hiding from who?" The boy spoke next. Same tone, same softness. "They come with the bright." I frowned and looked up toward the sky on instinct. The upper parts of the trestle vanished into the fog, the steel beams crisscrossing in a dark pattern overhead. A train whistle sounded somewhere far away, muffled by distance and mist. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said slowly. "Who's watching? Are you guys lost?" The kids didn't answer. They just stared upward again, necks tilted at the same angle. Not perfectly synchronized, but close enough to give me a weird tightening feeling in my stomach. The fog thickened around the beams as a breeze drifted through. My skin prickled, even though I was warm from running. Something felt wrong, subtle, like the air had a weight to it. "Look," I said, stepping closer. "If somebody's bothering you, I can call." I never finished the sentence, because the sky brightened, not like sunrise, not like the sun hitting a patch of clear sky. It was a fast, diffuse glow, spreading across the fog from above the trestle, lighting everything in a pale white for just a second. There was no direction to it, no source. It just appeared. The steel beams reflected it in dull flashes. The river glimmered. The fog lit up from inside itself, looking like a glowing mist. Then it was gone. The echo of the moment hung in the air, though, an aftertaste of brightness. I blinked hard, trying to adjust. The kids hadn't moved. They were still staring at the beams, but something about their posture seemed different, tighter, more focused. "What was that?" I asked out loud, mostly to myself. Neither of them looked at me. I swallowed, adrenaline starting to spike. "All right, seriously, what's going on? Do you—" A train horn blared again, much closer this time. The echo under the trestle made it sound like the noise was right on top of us, even though the tracks overhead were empty. I flinched. The kids didn't. The girl finally turned her head toward me. Her eyes were pitch black, not dark brown, not shadowed, black, flat and reflective like the river before sunrise. "You shouldn't be here when it looks for you," she said. My chest tightened, a sudden rush of cold running through me. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay, I think I'm gonna call someone." The boy lifted his chin slightly, still not looking directly at me, just upward. "It watches from the bright." My fingers brushed my phone in my pocket, but I didn't pull it out. Something in my instincts told me not to, like drawing attention to myself was a bad idea. Another glow, faint, appeared at the top of the trestle. Not as strong as before, just a soft halo clinging to the beams. I looked up. Nothing there. No lights, no reflections, no movement, just the lingering brightness fading out. When I lowered my gaze again, the kids were gone. I spun in a quick circle, heart pounding. They couldn't have run. The gravel made too much noise. They couldn't have disappeared into the woods. The brush was dense and dry, and I would have heard branches snapping. The riverbank dropped off sharply on both sides. No way they'd jumped without a sound. "Hello," I said, louder now, voice bouncing off the concrete footing. "Kids?" Only my own echo answered. I backed away from the trestle slowly, scanning every shadow. The fog drifted in thin ribbons now, breaking around my legs. The river gurgled softly over the rocks. My breath felt too loud. I kept looking for any sign of them. A hoodie sleeve, a shoe print, something. But there was nothing. Not a single scuff mark on the gravel except my own. A gust of wind rushed through the beams. The metal groaned overhead, a deep, hollow sound that made me jump. It wasn't unusual for the trestle to creak, but somehow it felt connected to everything else happening, like the steel was reacting to something I couldn't see. I forced myself to step backward, then turn toward the trail. My run was forgotten. All I wanted was distance between me and that bridge. Every few steps I looked back, expecting to see the kids reappear. They didn't. By the time I reached the main path, the fog was thinning out. Birds were starting to chirp in the trees. A dog barked somewhere far off, probably from one of the houses near the riverbed. Normal morning sounds, but none of it felt normal. I kept glancing up at the sky on my walk home. The brightness earlier, whatever it was, left a strange emptiness behind, like I'd witnessed something that shouldn't have happened. When I finally reached my apartment, I shut the door and locked it, even though it was broad daylight by then. My hands were shaking as I filled a glass of water. For the rest of the day, every time sunlight hit something just right, my kitchen counter, the surface of a parked car, a puddle on the sidewalk, I felt a jolt of fear in my chest. Not because it reminded me of lightning, but because it reminded me of something looking for me from above. I was taking the trash out behind Walker's General, same as I did every night around closing. The store sits at the edge of town, really just a gas pump, a deli counter, and a couple aisles of stuff people buy when they don't feel like driving an hour to Walmart. Out back, there's a single floodlight mounted above the delivery door, and beyond that, it's nothing but trees and dark fields. It was early October, a warm night for the season. The sky was moonless, just a thick wash of stars overhead. I remember that detail because the air felt too quiet, like the whole world was holding its breath. Even the cicadas were quieter than usual. I was dragging two heavy bags toward the dumpster, plastic scraping against the gravel, when I noticed them. Two kids stood in the glow of the floodlight, right beside the dumpster, waiting. I hadn't heard them walk up, hadn't seen them when I came out the door. 1 second, the space was empty. The next, they were just there. A boy and a girl, both maybe 10 or 11. Pale faces, still as statues. Their hands were folded neatly in front of them, fingers interlaced like they were waiting in line at a church service. They didn't look scared or curious or cold. They just stared at me with blank expressions that didn't match the situation at all. I stopped moving. The bags sagged in my hands. You folks okay?" I said, voice sounding too loud in the quiet. They didn't blink, didn't tilt their heads, didn't shift their weight. The girl spoke first, her voice low and steady. "Has the buzzing above the roof stopped yet?" I glanced up, automatically. Just the floodlight, the edge of the shingled roof, a few moths bumping into the bulb. Nothing buzzing, nothing unusual. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. "Were you hearing something?" The boy repeated it, same exact tone. "Above the roof." I tried to follow their gaze, but it wasn't aimed at any one thing. They were both staring straight ahead at me, through me, past me. It was hard to tell. "We're closed right now," I said. "Do you need help finding your parents? You shouldn't be out here this late." Neither kid reacted. The girl's hands tightened slightly. Just a small motion, but it was the first time either of them had moved at all. Her dark eyes stayed locked on mine. No whites visible. No reflection from the floodlight. Just black. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Before I could say anything else, the hum started. A low-frequency vibration rolled through the air, soft at first, like a truck engine idling a few streets over. Then it grew louder. The metal siding of the store rattled. The dumpster vibrated under my hand. The windows on the back door trembled in their frames, humming in a way that felt more like pressure than sound. I staggered back, dropping one of the trash bags. It hit the gravel with a wet thump, but the hum drowned out the noise. "What the hell?" I started, looking up at the roof again, expecting to see something, anything, making that noise. Nothing was there. Just the same dark roofline against the sky. The hum seemed to come from everywhere at once, like the air itself was shaking. The kids watched me, their expressions unchanged. They didn't look scared, didn't even seem to notice the noise that was rattling the metal siding behind them. The hum reached a peak, a deeper vibration that I felt in my chest and teeth more than I heard. I bent down slightly, hands on my knees, waiting for something to give. Maybe the floodlight to shatter, or the overhead power line to snap. And then it stopped, just cut off. No fading, no slow return to silence. It was there 1 second and gone the next, leaving the night strangely hollow. I straightened slowly, rubbing my arms as the leftover tingling faded. The kids were gone. Not walking away, not running. Gone. The gravel behind the store looked undisturbed. The dumpster cast its usual shadow. The patch of weeds along the fence swayed gently in the leftover breeze from the hum, but beyond that, nothing moved. I checked behind the dumpster. Empty. I checked the fence line. No gaps. Nobody climbing over. I walked the length of the back wall, shining my phone flashlight into the trees. No voices. No footsteps. No small figures darting between the trunks. There was nowhere they could have gone that fast. The store sits on a long stretch of open gravel before the forest starts. If they'd run, I would have heard it over the settling of the siding and the ringing in my ears. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The smell of garbage hung thick in the air. The floodlight buzzed faintly, as if trying to pretend nothing weird had happened. A breeze picked up and blew dust across the gravel. Finally, I gathered the trash bags, tossed them into the dumpster, and backed away quickly. Not because I thought something was about to jump out, but because I didn't want to stand in that spot any longer than I had to. Inside, the store felt strangely bright, too normal. The radio behind the counter was on its usual country station, but the sound seemed thin and distorted. I locked the back door and checked it twice. When I finally got into my truck and drove home, The radio cut out a couple of times, just brief static bursts. Every time it did, I found myself glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see two small shapes sitting in the bed of the truck, hands folded. The next morning, I came in early to meet the bread delivery guy. Out of curiosity, I walked behind the store again. Nothing looked disturbed. No footprints except mine. No signs that anyone had stood there at all. But when I looked up at the roof, something caught my eye. A small set of scuff marks, two parallel streaks right near the edge, like someone had been standing up there recently, fresh enough that the dew hadn't settled on them. I told myself it was probably just a raccoon, but I didn't take the trash out alone for a while after that. I was out in the orchard earlier than usual that morning, mostly because the cold snap the night before had me worried I'd lose the last of the apples. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee. Just poured it into a travel mug, threw on a jacket, and headed out while the grass was still stiff with frost. The sun was barely up, giving everything that dim blue look like the world hadn't fully woken yet. I walked down the second row from the fence line, brushing my hand along the branches out of habit, checking for fruit that had split. The air felt heavy, not thick exactly, just heavier than it should have for late October. Even my breaths felt slower coming out. About halfway down the row, I noticed something that made me stop mid-step. Two kids were standing between the trees, a boy and a girl. Both looked maybe 10 or 11. They were just there, not walking, not talking, not doing anything except staring straight up at the sky through the branches. They stood perfectly still, like they were carved from the same frost-covered wood as the trees around them. I didn't recognize them. Couldn't have. The nearest neighbor with kids was nearly a mile down the road. I cleared my throat. "Hey," I said, trying to sound more confused than startled. "You two lost?" No reaction. They didn't turn their heads or lower their gazes. I took a few steps closer, my boots crunching loud on the frozen grass. "Kids?" I tried again. "Can you hear me?" The girl finally spoke, but she didn't look at me. Her voice was soft and calm, like she was reciting something from memory. "Did you hear them pass overhead last night?" I stopped dead. "Who?" The boy answered this time, same tone. "They were bright. That was it. No explanation, no questions for me, no normal hi, or we're looking for our dog, or whatever a kid might actually say to a stranger in a field before sunrise. They didn't even glance in my direction. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but something moved above us. Not the wind, not an animal, a shimmer. It rippled across the shadows on the branches like someone dragging a clear sheet of glass through the air. Just a thin distortion, bending the lines of the branches for maybe half a second before vanishing. It didn't make a sound, but it changed the light enough that I felt it more than saw it, the way you feel a sudden shadow pass overhead. I stared upward, heart hammering, but the sky was empty, just pale clouds and the beginning of sunlight on the eastern side. I looked back at the kids. They were gone, not walking away, gone, like I had blinked them out of existence. 1 second they were standing there. The next there was open space between the trees. No movement, no sound, no fading footsteps. The orchard had gone dead quiet again. The kind of quiet where your ears ring because they're waiting for a sound that doesn't come. I spun in a quick circle, scanning the rows. Frost still covered the grass. There were no tracks except my own. There were places to hide, sure, behind trunks or deeper between rows, but I would have heard something. The orchard wasn't big enough for them to run without making noise. "Hello?" I called out, voice echoing off the trees. "Kids? Where'd you go?" Nothing. Just the brittle rustling of leaves that hadn't fallen yet. My first thought was that I must have imagined the shimmer, maybe even the kids, but I knew I hadn't. The image of them was too clear. The girl's brown coat, the boy's pale blue hoodie, their bare hands too thin for the temperature, and their faces. I hadn't noticed anything odd at first, but now that I replayed the moment, something about their eyes bothered me. Like they were too dark, not reflective at all. Like they absorbed the little bit of morning light instead of catching it. I tried to shake that thought off and walked farther down the road to look behind the next set of trees. Still nothing. I checked behind every trunk, ducked under low branches, even jogged to the end of the orchard where the old fence line was half fallen over. No kids, no footprints, no movement, just silence. thick, cold silence that felt pressed up against my ears. I pulled out my phone to call my neighbor, thinking maybe his grandkids had wandered down the wrong road before sunrise, but the screen blinked twice, bright to dim, like the brightness setting was malfunctioning. Then the whole thing froze on my lock screen, clock stuck at 6:13. It had been 6:13 when I left the house. I tried to reset it, but it wouldn't respond. I pocketed it and kept walking, more unsettled than before. I hadn't been in the orchard that long, 5 minutes maybe, 10 at most, but something about the light made me feel like more time had passed. The frost didn't look as solid anymore. It had softened, like the sun had been up longer than it should have. Halfway back to the house, the air changed again. The same shimmer, only bigger, rolled across the tops of the trees, bending sunlight in a slow wave. It passed from the far end of the orchard to the fence line in maybe 3 seconds. Still silent, still impossible. I froze in place, my breath hung unmoving in front of me. Nothing followed the shimmer, no sound, no movement, just another wave of stillness. I didn't wait around after that. I walked quickly back toward the house, my boots leaving dark prints in the thawing frost. My dog Rosie stood at the sliding door whining, tail low, like she'd been watching something out there long before I came back. When I stepped inside, she wouldn't even go near the window. I tried to busy myself. Coffee, dishes, checking emails. But every few minutes I found myself glancing toward the orchard. I kept expecting to see those two kids standing between the rows again, staring upward with those blank dark eyes, or that ripple of light passing through the branches. Around mid-morning, I finally checked my phone again. The time had jumped ahead to 9:52. No missed calls, no alerts, battery still full, everything perfectly normal, like it hadn't glitched at all. By noon, the frost had melted completely, and the orchard like any other patch of land getting ready for winter. But the wrongness of the morning sat under my skin all day, the way waiting pressure sits in the air before a thunderstorm. Later that night, around 2 in the morning, something woke me up. A faint, low vibration, not loud enough to be a sound, more like a feeling moving through the walls. My dog lifted her head from the foot of the bed, ears perked, but she didn't bark. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. Then, barely audible, a soft shift of air, like something large passing overhead without disturbing the wind. I went to the window and looked out toward the orchard. It was dark, just shadows and moonlight on the branches. Everything was still. No kids. No shimmer. Just the trees. But the longer I stared, the more it felt like something was watching back. I closed the blinds and didn't look again until morning. I was checking the apples for frost damage when I first saw them. It was late in the season, the kind of cold October morning where your breath hangs in the air even after the sun's up. The orchard behind my house wasn't big, maybe 20 rows total, but it was enough work to keep me busy most weekends. That morning, I was walking the center row, trying to figure out how bad the overnight freeze had been, when I heard something that made me stop. Not a sound, exactly, more like the absence of one. No birds, no wind, no rustling, just this stillness that didn't match the way the branches swayed in little jerks from the breeze. I took a few more steps and saw them standing about halfway down the row. 2 kids, a boy and a girl, pale-faced, thin jackets, no gloves. They stood between the trees like they'd been dropped there, facing upward toward the sky. They didn't flinch when I approached, didn't even glance at me. They just stared through the branches, necks tilted at the same sharp angle. I slowed, boots crunching on frozen grass. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice level. "You two okay? You're not supposed to be out here." No reaction. I stepped a little closer, stopping about 10 feet away. They were young, 9, maybe 10. No backpacks, no bikes, nothing. Their clothes looked normal enough. The boy had a faded blue hoodie, the girl a brown coat missing a button. "You kids live up the road somewhere?" I tried again. "Did you get lost?" The girl spoke first. Her voice was soft, like she was talking into a telephone from far away. "Did you hear them pass overhead last night?" I frowned. "Hear who?" The boy spoke next, same tone, same detached calm. They were bright. The orchard felt colder all of a sudden, the kind of cold that sinks past your clothes and into your ribs. I shoved my hands deeper into my jacket pockets. "Listen," I said. "If someone dropped you off out here, I need to know." A faint shimmer moved along the branches above them. I didn't imagine it. It wasn't sunlight. There was barely any sun yet, and what little there was came from behind me, not overhead. This shimmer slid across the shadows like heat haze in reverse, bending the lines of the branches for a split second, then disappearing. The kids didn't react. They still stared at the sky as if waiting for something. My heartbeat started climbing. I glanced upward, squinting through the crisscrossing branches and thinning leaves. Nothing but a pale morning sky, the kind with a thin layer of ice crystal clouds you sometimes see before a cold front. "You kids need to come with me," I said. My voice sounded more strained than I wanted it to. "I'm calling your parents. This is private property, and it's not safe to." I blinked. They were gone. Just gone. I spun in a circle, breath puffing out in sharp bursts. They couldn't have moved quietly. The grass was crunchy. Every step I took made noise. There were no tracks between the rows except my own. The orchard was flat and open. There was nowhere to hide. No rustled branches, no snapped twigs. Nothing. "Hello?" I called out, voice echoing faintly through the trees. "Kids?" Only the wind answered. Finally, like it had been waiting for them to leave before moving again. The branches rattled softly. I walked deeper down the row, scanning between trees, checking behind trunks, even looking for running tracks in the frost. Nothing. My breath came faster, fogging up in front of me. The cold pressed in tight around my shoulders. I tried to think rationally. Kids don't just vanish. They'd probably run when I blinked and I just didn't hear them. Maybe they'd cut between rows and bolted toward the road. Maybe they were playing some stupid prank. But none of those explanations fit. There had been no footfalls, no rustling, and that shimmer, whatever that had been, didn't feel like part of the normal world. I walked the entire orchard, row by row. It took maybe 20 minutes. The frost clung to the grass and the apples, some of which had split open from the cold. When I reached the far end, I turned back and scanned the entire place again. Still nothing, just trees and fading morning fog. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out and saw the display flash twice, bright, then dim, like it was struggling to decide its own brightness. I checked the time. 6:42 a.m. When had I left the house? I tried to backtrack in my head. I thought it had been around 6, maybe a little after, but it felt like more time had passed than 20 or 30 minutes. The air had that heavy, slightly underwater feel, like I'd stepped out of a dark theater into bright daylight too fast. I shook it off and headed back toward the house. Halfway there, something made me stop again. A ripple, no sound, just a ripple, moved across the orchard. I saw it from the corner of my eye. It shimmered across the branches like before, bending the shadows in a smooth wave from left to right, like something transparent had glided over them at head height. I snapped my gaze toward it, but it had already vanished. "Okay," I muttered to myself. "I'm done." I walked faster. The silence behind me felt wrong, not threatening, just watchful, like the orchard was listening. When I got back to my house, I went straight inside and locked the door behind me. My dog Penny trotted over and nudged my leg, whining like she sensed something off. I scratched behind her ears with shaking fingers. The house felt colder than usual. I checked the thermostat, normal, but the air still felt wrong, charged in a way I couldn't define. I poured coffee into a mug and stood at the kitchen window, staring out at the frost-covered rows. From a distance, the orchard looked peaceful, completely ordinary. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined the shimmer, or misheard the kids, or overreacted because it was early and cold and I hadn't slept great. But the way they'd spoken, the way they hadn't reacted to me or the cold or anything, that kept replaying in my mind. And their eyes. I didn't notice it in the moment. Maybe it was the dim light. Maybe I wasn't looking directly at them long enough. But thinking back, there was something off about their eyes, like they had no shine, no reflection, just flat darkness that didn't catch the morning light at all. I stayed inside for the rest of the day, checking the orchard from the window every hour or so. Nothing happened, no shimmer, no movement, no sign of the kids. But that night, lying in bed, a strange thought kept creeping in. What did they mean by "heard them pass overhead last night"? I tried not to think about it too much. Still, I kept waking up, convinced I'd heard something moving low across the sky. And every time, the orchard outside my window seemed a little too still. I was out on the Ridgeback Trail that afternoon, a little later than I planned. The weather had been off since morning, overcast but warm. The kind of warm that didn't feel tied to the air so much as coming from the ground itself. I'd hiked that route more times than I could count, but I'd never seen it quite so still. Not much wind, not many birds, even the insects seemed quieter. I figured I had enough time to make it to the old fire tower and back before dusk. The tower had been decommissioned years ago, left to rust into the ridge. Its metal frame stuck out above the tree line like a skeleton. I always liked the view from up there, though I never climbed the stairs past the halfway point. They creaked in a way that didn't inspire confidence. I was maybe a quarter mile from it when I noticed the change in the air. It felt thicker, heavier. I slowed down without meaning to, listening for something I couldn't name. The forest had that weird hush it sometimes gets before a storm, except the sky hadn't darkened at all. I rounded a bend, stepped over a fallen branch, and saw the tower rising up ahead, and two kids standing at its base. They stood side by side, almost shoulder to shoulder, heads tilted sharply upward as if staring at the top platform. A boy and a girl, maybe 10, 11. Not dressed for hiking, thin sweaters, jeans, sneakers that looked too clean for the trail. Their arms hung straight down at their sides, fingers still, too still. I stopped a good 30 feet back. Tanner wasn't with me. I only bring him on the lower loops, so I didn't have a barking dog to alert them. For a moment I thought maybe they were with some nearby group or a family I hadn't seen, but there was no one else around. The trail behind me was empty, and the one ahead curved tightly around the tower, making it obvious no one else was in sight. "Hey there," I called gently. "Everything all right? You two up here with someone?" They didn't turn around, didn't react at all. Their gazes stayed fixed upward, necks still as statues. I stepped off the trail and walked closer, boots crunching the old pine needles. "Kids," the girl spoke first, voice quiet but clear. "Did you feel the calling?" The boy followed, same tone, same cadence. "Through the trees." I stopped dead. "The what?" Neither moved. Neither blinked. They just stared up at the rusted platform like something important was happening above them. I followed their gaze, scanning the tower from bottom to top. Nothing. Just the usual flaking paint, bent metal, and the faded outline where the old radio dish had once been bolted. Nothing moving. Nothing shining. Just stillness. That was when the sound started. A faint tone, high and thin, like a tuning fork being struck far away. Except, it wasn't far. It wasn't coming from the tower either. It felt like it came from everywhere at once, moving through the air in a steady hum. Not loud, but deep enough that it buzzed in my teeth. I swallowed hard. The kids didn't react to the sound at all. They stayed frozen, heads still angled upward as if something invisible hung above the platform. The tone rose slightly, dipping again, almost like it was searching for a particular pitch. I pressed a hand to my chest, suddenly aware of how fast my heart was beating. "Kids," I said, taking a small step backward. "If someone's messing around up there, we should all move back. That tower's not safe. You really need to." The tone cut off instantly, and the silence that replaced it felt wrong. Too sudden, too complete. I blinked, adjusting my eyes to the quiet. When I looked back at the kids, they were gone. Not running into the trees, not ducking behind the tower, just gone. 1 second they stood there, perfectly still. The next, the space beneath the tower was empty. No movement in the underbrush, no fading footsteps, nothing. I rushed forward, heart hammering, scanning the ground. The dirt and pine needles were undisturbed, no footprints besides my own. I looked behind the nearest trees, knowing I'd find something, anything, but there was no sign of them. "Hello?" I called out, voice catching in my throat. "Kids? This isn't funny. Where are you?" Nothing. The forest didn't even echo. I circled the tower slowly, checking every side, every shadow. The metal frame creaked softly in the warm breeze, but even that sounded hollow, like it came from too far away. I placed a hand on the lowest support beam. It vibrated faintly under my fingers, like it had held onto the tone longer than the air had. I pulled my hand back quickly. The feeling under my skin lingered. My mind started grabbing for explanations. Maybe I'd been tired and mistaken. Maybe the kids had run while I blinked. Maybe they ducked into the underbrush too fast for me to hear them. But that tone, that wasn't imagination. I could still feel it reverberating somewhere behind my ribs, like an echo that didn't want to fade. I turned back toward the trail, but before leaving, I looked up at the top of the tower again. I didn't know why. The kids had stared so intently at that spot, I felt like I had to understand what they'd seen. The platform was empty, of course, just rust and broken railing. But for a split second, I thought I saw the air ripple above it, like heat distortion. Only it wasn't warm enough for that, and the ripple moved sideways, not upward. I blinked hard, and it was gone. That was enough for me. I walked out of there fast, not quite running, but close, and didn't slow down until the tower was completely out of sight. The further I got from it, the more the forest sounds returned. Wind through branches, distant bird calls, the normal stuff I'd been expecting but hadn't heard earlier. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sky had darkened. The warmth from earlier was gone, replaced with a cold breeze rolling down from the ridge. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting it, just staring at the tree line, waiting for something else to feel off. Nothing did, but the quiet wasn't comforting. That night, at home, I kept hearing that faint tone, never loud, never distinct, more like an afterimage for sound. Every time the house settled, I'd jolt upright, thinking it was starting again. I didn't sleep much. For days afterward, I avoided the Ridgeback Trail. Not on purpose at first, I just found reasons not to go. When I finally did return, the tower looked the same as it always had, rusted, leaning a bit more, getting swallowed by the forest inch by inch. No kids, no tone, no ripples in the air. But when I walked past the base of the tower again, I noticed the dirt was smooth. No footprints, no animal tracks. The ground looked untouched, like it had been swept clean, even though it hadn't rained in a week. I left quickly and stuck to the lower loop after that. And every now and then, when the wind is dead and the trees stand too still, I swear I feel a faint vibration under my feet, like something deeper in the forest is humming again. I was driving home from my sister's place in Montrose when the storm hit harder than the forecast had warned. The snow went from steady to thick in minutes, the kind that eats the headlights and makes the whole world look like you're moving through a tunnel of static. I should have stopped at the last town, but I kept telling myself it was only another hour to my place outside Gunnison. I'd driven those mountain highways and worse. At least, I thought I had. It was close to 9 p.m., and the temperature had already dropped below 10 degrees. My tires crunched through fresh powder, no tracks ahead of me, nothing behind. Just a long, white stretch of two-lane highway winding between dark pines and rocky cuts. The snow fell in these thick, spiraling sheets that made the road feel narrower than it was. I had the radio on low, more for company than anything. The signal drifted in and out with static. I didn't think much of it. Storm like that, everything gets weird. But at some point, the static turned into a high, wavering tone. Almost like feedback. Not loud. More like something humming inside the car rather than through the speakers. When I reached over to turn the radio off, the sound didn't change. That made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried ignoring it, gripping the wheel tighter and leaning forward a little to see through the snow. The road curved left, then straightened again. And that's when I saw them. 2 kids, standing dead center in the lane ahead of me. I slammed on the brakes, the truck fishtailing slightly before the tires caught. I stopped maybe 20 feet from them, heart thudding hard enough I felt it in my throat. For a second I thought they were deer or someone's dog in the road, but no, these were kids. A boy and a girl, about 10 or 11, wearing thin jackets totally wrong for the weather. No hats, no gloves, no backpacks. They just stood there, facing me, snow piling on their shoulders like they'd been there a long time. My first thought was that someone's car must have gone off the road. Maybe they'd climbed out and were trying to flag down help. But I didn't see any tire tracks leading off into the trees. No footprints in the snow except the faint indentations right beneath them. I rolled the window down just a crack. The cold slapped me in the face immediately. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you two okay? Did you get stuck?" They didn't move. They didn't even shiver. I put the truck in park and kept my hand on the gear shift, just in case. My gut was already tying itself into knots. The girl stepped forward first. Not much, just one small step. Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. "Did you see the bright fall?" she asked. I leaned closer to the window. The what? The boy echoed her, same tone, same stillness. The bright fall in the sky. I glanced upward instinctively, but all I saw was snow, thick, swirling, relentless. I didn't see anything, I said. Where are your parents? Did a car crash? You need to come over here, it's too cold to... A light exploded around us. Not thunder, not lightning, no sound at all. Just a white flash that swallowed the snow, the trees, the road, everything. It was so bright I slammed my eyes shut, grabbing the steering wheel like the truck was about to lift off the pavement. My brain expected thunder, the crack of lightning hitting close, something, anything. But there was nothing except my own pulse beating loud in my ears. When the light faded and my vision cleared, I blinked hard, trying to steady the shapes around me. The road was empty. The kids were gone. I scanned the snow through the windshield, heartbeat climbing again. I stepped out into the cold without even thinking about it, boots sinking into fresh powder. The wind blew the snow sideways, but not enough to erase tracks that quickly. There were none. Not a single footprint leading away from where they'd stood. The snow was untouched, perfectly smooth, except for the tire marks my truck had made when I'd skidded to a stop. My breath came out in huge clouds. "Hello?" I shouted over the wind. "Kids? Hey, where'd you go?" Only the storm answered, brushing snow across the asphalt. I turned in a slow circle, scanning every direction. There was nowhere for them to run. No ditches, no rock cuts close enough to hide behind, no nearby houses or trails. Just a long, empty highway, smothered in white. The humming sound inside the truck had stopped. I didn't notice that right away. All I could think about was the way those kids had looked at me. Completely calm, like the cold didn't touch them. Their faces were pale, but not in the normal "it's freezing out here" way. More like the pale of something that didn't have much inside it to warm it up. And their eyes. I hadn't really seen them clearly until I replayed the moment in my mind later. Out there on the road, everything was white and blowing and frantic, and I wasn't exactly studying faces. But once the adrenaline settled, I remembered the way their eyes looked flat. Not dark like brown eyes, dark like the absence of anything. Like little pits that swallowed the light instead of reflecting it. I checked the snow again, walking a few feet down each side of the road. Still no tracks, no sign they'd ever been there. The cold started biting at my fingers through my gloves, and the panic finally caught up with me. I hurried back to the truck, slammed the door, locked it without meaning to, and sat there breathing hard into the steering wheel. The windshield looked normal again, just snow sliding across it. But the world outside felt wrong, too quiet, even with the wind. I forced myself to keep driving, as slow as I could manage without risking getting stuck. The storm started easing a little by the time I hit the turnoff toward home. But every few minutes, the sky brightened faintly, just for a second, like someone turning on a massive distant flashlight behind the clouds. No thunder, no sound, just flashes in a storm that wasn't supposed to have lightning. When I finally reached my driveway, my hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the key to shut the truck off. The house looked normal. Lights on, snow piling up, everything still. But the second I stepped inside, my dog started barking from the bedroom, her hackles raised like she'd sensed something long before I arrived. I couldn't sleep that night. Every so often I'd hear a soft, shifting sound outside, like something moving over deep snow without sinking into it. Whenever I checked the window, there was nothing but white, and the highway in the distance covered in drifting flakes. But the silence was never quite silence. There was always an undercurrent, a thin, distant tone I couldn't pin down. And at every time it came back, I kept seeing those two kids in the headlights, snow settling on their hair and shoulders, asking me if I had seen something fall from the sky. I was walking my dog Tanner near the old quarry the night it happened. I always took him there at dusk because hardly anyone went that way anymore. The place had been shut down since the late 90s, fenced off half-heartedly with rusted panels people kept cutting through. The equipment had been hauled out years before, leaving just a big scar in the earth. Flat gravel around the rim and a steep drop into a wide pit, lined with rocks the color of dried blood. It was quiet that evening, windless, warm for early October, but with that weird stillness that made it feel like the air was waiting on something. Tanner pulled ahead on the leash, nose twitching at whatever had been through earlier, probably deer or coyotes. We walked the gravel path along the rim, dust kicking up under my boots. Halfway around the bend, Tanner froze. Not stiff, not scared, just confused. He stared ahead, tail dropping to half-mast. I followed his gaze. Two kids were sitting on the edge of the quarry, their legs dangling over the drop like they were swinging their feet from a dock. A boy and a girl. Both looked maybe 10 or 11. Their clothes didn't fit the evening. Thin shirts, no jackets, dusty sneakers. Their hands rested in their laps, fingers interlocked the exact same way. I slowed down, keeping a little distance. "Hey!" I called out, trying not to sound startled. "You two all right? You shouldn't be sitting that close to the edge." They didn't turn around, not even a flinch. Tanner's leash went slack. He took a few cautious steps backward, ears pinned flat. I walked closer, just enough to see more of their profiles. They had the same posture, backs straight, heads turned slightly upward like they were looking at the sky instead of the pit below. "Kids?" I said, a little louder. "Do your parents know you're out here? It's not a safe spot." The girl spoke without moving her head. Her voice was flat, soft, almost bored. "Are you waiting for the return light?" I stared at the back of her head, not sure I heard her right. "The what?" the boy echoed her. "The return light." The way they said it, calm, synced, made my stomach tighten. I looked around the quarry rim, expecting maybe someone else nearby, maybe a flashlight or a campsite or some sign they weren't alone. Nothing, just empty gravel and dust. "Look, it's getting dark," I said. "Why don't you move away from the edge? You could slip." Neither moved. Neither even adjusted their posture. Then Tanner began whining, a low, uneasy sound he never made unless something felt seriously wrong. I knelt and tried to calm him, but he kept glancing from me to the quarry, like he wanted to run but wasn't sure which direction was safer. That's when I noticed the light. It came from deep in the pit. Not a beam, not a spotlight. More like a soft pulse, white with a hint of blue, glowing up from somewhere far below the rubble. It brightened, dimmed, brightened again, steady as a heartbeat. The hairs on my arms rose instantly. There shouldn't have been anything down there. No machinery, no generators, no hidden poles or buried cables. The quarry had been stripped bare long before I ever moved into town. I stepped to the edge, carefully, not close enough to slip, to get a better look. The pit stretched out maybe 100 feet down, uneven and jagged. The light wasn't reflecting off anything I could see. It came from beneath, from a place deeper than the pit physically went, like something underneath the quarry floor was glowing through it. I was staring so hard I almost forgot about the kids. When I finally tore my eyes away from the light and turned back to them, my breath caught in my throat. They were gone. Not walking away. Gone. I spun around, scanning the gravel path in every direction. The dust was undisturbed. No footprints, no scuffs, no marks. The ground was soft enough to take prints even from a squirrel, but there was nothing at all. "Hello?" I shouted, instantly regretting how my voice cracked. "Kids, where'd you go?" Only my echo answered. Tanner pressed against my leg hard enough to nearly knock me off balance. His entire body was trembling, but he wasn't looking at the trees or the path. He was staring straight into the pit, hackles raised, lips pulled back in a silent warning. The pulsing light brightened again, once, twice, 3 times, each flash slightly stronger than the last. No sound came with it, but something in the air shifted, like a gentle pressure behind my ears, the kind you get before a storm breaks. I squinted into the pit, trying to see if anything was moving. Rocks, dust, shadows. Nothing. Nothing except that light that looked like it came from a place that didn't exist. I backed away slowly, dragging Tanner with me. Every step felt too loud, too sharp. The quarry swallowed sounds strangely on calm nights, but this time it felt like the air itself was absorbing them. The light pulsed again, this time bright enough to throw faint shadows across the gravel. I turned and walked as quickly as my legs would go without running. I didn't dare look back. Tanner kept right beside me, every muscle tight, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. By the time we reached the cut in the fence, the air felt normal again, cool, quiet, and still. I didn't see any more flashes, no weird pulses, no kids. When we got home, Tanner paced the living room non-stop, stopping only to stare at the back door as if something might come up the steps. I tried to distract him, but he wouldn't settle. That wasn't like him. Hours later, long after the sun had gone down, I stepped outside again just to convince myself the world was normal. The quarry was a mile away, but from my driveway I could usually see a faint line of its rim against the horizon. That night it looked different. Not lit, not glowing, um, just different. Like the dark around it wasn't the same shade as the rest of the night. I slept maybe 2 hours. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those kids sitting with their legs dangling, like staring upward like they were waiting for something only they could see. Their voices repeating the same strange question over and over. Are you waiting for the return light? I didn't go back to the quarry for a week. Not until I was sure whatever I'd seen was just something weird the mind does at dusk when things get quiet. But when I finally worked up the nerve and walked the same path, there were no kid-sized footprints anywhere on the rim. The light never came back, at least not where I could see it. But sometimes, when the wind is dead and the sky is clear, Tanner will stop mid-step and stare in the direction of the quarry like something down there is calling out again. And I try not to listen too hard. I'd only rented the cabin for 3 nights. It was early October, off-season in that part of northern Minnesota, and the place was cheap because the owner said the road got muddy after rainstorms. I didn't mind. I just needed a break from work and noise, and the listing photos made the cabin look simple but clean. Small porch, wood stove, a view of the lake through the trees. My first night there was quiet. Too quiet, actually. I remember sitting on the porch after dinner, listening for loons or crickets or anything, but the whole forest around me felt muted, like sound didn't travel as far. The second night was colder. The sky had that hazy look it gets before a frost, and by 9 I was already inside with the stove going. I stayed up late reading, not tired enough to sleep yet. At some point around midnight, I shut off the lamp and listened to the fire settle. That was when I heard the knocking. It wasn't loud, just a soft, steady tap, tap, tap on the front door, spaced maybe 2 seconds apart. I froze halfway out of the blankets, listening. There were no footsteps on the porch, no crunch of leaves, just those quiet knocks, patient and almost polite. I checked my phone, 12:17 a.m. No chance the owner would show up at that hour. No neighbors nearby either. The closest place was maybe a quarter mile up the road. The knocking came again, soft, like someone didn't want to wake the whole house. I grabbed the lantern from the bedside table, turned the dial low, and walked to the door. I didn't open it, just peeked through the little window on the top half. 2 kids stood on the porch, a boy and a girl. Both looked maybe 10 or 11. They wore light jackets, way too thin for the cold, and jeans that looked almost new. Their arms hung straight at their sides, not tucked in for warmth. Neither of them seemed bothered by the temperature. The girl lifted her head a little and spoke, voice muffled through the door. "Can we stay until the lights stop moving?" Her tone was flat, but not rude, just empty. I didn't answer right away. My hands prickled with a kind of static panic. I wasn't afraid of kids, obviously, but the situation made no sense. They had no flashlights, no backpacks, no breath visible in the cold air, and they hadn't knocked like kids lost in the woods. More like they expected me. The boy spoke next, same empty tone. "They're faster tonight." I swallowed hard and flicked the lantern a little brighter. The kids didn't react to the change in light, not even a flinch. They stared toward the window, but not directly at me, like they were looking through the glass rather than at it. "Are you too lost?" I finally managed. Neither answered. I considered cracking the door to ask again, but something about the way they stood, too still, too patient, kept me from touching the handle. I tried to look past them, out into the yard. The night seemed darker than before, even with the lantern behind me. Then the sky flickered. Not lightning. Not anything like lightning. It was a fast streak of white, thin and sharp, zipping across the tree canopy like a line drawn in the air. It didn't make a sound, not even a whisper. The kids both turned their heads toward the sky at the exact same moment. Another streak flashed. This one curved, actually curved, like it had control over its path. Again, no sound. The girl said without looking at me, "They're close." I backed away from the door so fast I bumped into the coat rack. My heart was pounding, breaths too quick. I'd gone camping alone plenty of times, hiked remote areas, never spooked easily. But this wasn't anything like getting startled by an animal or hearing weird noises in the woods. These kids weren't reacting the way normal kids would. They weren't scared, they weren't shivering, they weren't talking over each other or crying or asking for help. They were just waiting. Another flicker lit the sky, this one brighter, almost like a camera flash behind the clouds. The trees cast shadows on the snowless ground, sharp and straight, like the light had come from directly above. I stepped toward the window again, not wanting to, but feeling like I needed to see what they were doing. The porch was empty. I didn't even blink between seeing them and not seeing them. 1 second they were standing there, the next the boards were bare. No movement, no running footsteps, just gone. I flicked off the lantern instinctively and pressed my back to the wall, eyes straining in the dark. Maybe they'd stepped to the side. Maybe they were hiding. Maybe they'd run off into the trees. I forced myself to check again, slowly, breathing through my nose to keep quiet. The porch was still empty. The sky flickered once more, brighter than before. Bright enough that I saw the outline of the porch railing, the trees beyond it, even the faint glimmer of the lake far off through the branches. The light didn't feel natural. It didn't reflect the way headlights or moonlight did. It was just a flat white wash, here and gone in less than a second. After that, nothing. No more streaks, no more flashes. The darkness settled in again, thick and normal. I spent the rest of the night sitting in the armchair with the lantern on low, facing the door. My mind kept trying to rationalize it. Meteor shower? Kids from one of the other cabins? Some kind of prank? But none of it lined up. There were no tracks on the porch when I finally checked in the morning. The layer of frost on the boards was undisturbed except where I'd stepped out to look, and the woods around the cabin were quiet again. Back to birdsong, the faint rustle of wind, the normal stuff. I stayed one more night only because I didn't feel like packing in a hurry. Nothing happened that night, no knocking, no lights, but I didn't sleep much. I left early the next morning, before sunrise. When I locked up the cabin and turned to bring my bags to the car, I noticed something on the porch railing. 2 small handprints in the frost, side by side, perfectly still. I was riding a long stretch of county highway outside Davis, California. It was late afternoon, hot, dry, that kind of heat where the air feels thin like it's been baked too long. I'd been training for a small cycling event, nothing competitive, just something to keep me active. My usual loop took me under an old overpass where the interstate crossed above. The traffic noise was usually constant, this low, steady roar. That day, though, the interstate sounded muted. Not silent, just dampened, like someone had draped a thick blanket over the whole thing. I remember coasting a bit as I approached the shade under the overpass. The sun had been brutal, so even a few seconds of cool concrete shadow felt like a break. I leaned forward, adjusting my grip, and that's when I noticed 2 figures on top of the overpass. 2 kids. They stood right at the edge, side by side, looking straight down at me. They weren't leaning over or shifting their weight or anything. They just stared, perfectly still, like statues. I slowed down without really meaning to, rolling to a near stop under them. It wasn't safe to stop fully in the middle of the highway's shoulder, so I kept rolling, head tilted back, trying to get a better look. One of the kids, a boy, spoke. His voice carried down cleanly over the traffic noise, too cleanly. "Did you feel the shadow pass over?" I braked harder, confused. I didn't say anything back because my throat felt tight, like the words got stuck before they started. The girl beside him didn't look at me, didn't blink. She just waited, like she already knew what I would say or wouldn't. I rolled forward and finally dipped out from under the overpass. When the sun hit me again, it felt weaker somehow. Not cooler, just less bright. Like someone had scraped a thin layer off the daylight. Then the whole world dimmed, not dark, not shadowed by a cloud. The sky was clear, painfully clear, but the sunlight lost its edge, like something massive drifted between me and the sun for half a second. The way a bird might glide past a lamp, except on a scale that didn't make sense. There was no sound when it happened. No wind, no rush of air, just that soft dimming, like reality blinked. The kids didn't move. I craned my neck trying to see what might have caused it, but the sky was empty. Blue. Quiet. Normal in every visible way. By the time I turned my handlebars toward the access path that led up the slope to the overpass, My heart was hammering so hard my vision pulsed with it. I told myself it was probably two teenagers messing around. That dimming was probably just my eyes adjusting from the shade. That nothing weird was actually happening. But I pedaled up that slope way too fast, gravel snapping under my tires. The top of the overpass was open, except for the guardrails. You could see straight down both sides, all the way to the field stretching out on either direction. I rolled along the walkway, scanning for the kids. No one, not a single person on the entire span. The strangest part wasn't that they were gone, it was that they couldn't have left without me seeing them. The overpass was exposed. No fences to climb, no off-ramps close enough, nowhere to duck behind except the concrete pylons, and even those had gaps I could see through. I walked my bike up and down the length twice, leaning over the railings, checking the slopes on both sides. The dirt was undisturbed. No footprints, no crushed weeds. Nothing to show that anyone, much less two kids, had been standing there seconds earlier. The interstate noise returned to normal as I stood there, louder, sharper, like whatever had muffled it before was gone. I leaned my bike against the rail and took a long drink of water, hands shaking more than I wanted to admit. I kept replaying the boy's voice in my head. Steady, calm, way too composed for a kid standing above a random guy on a bike. Did you feel the shadow pass over? I kept wanting to tell myself they were just messing with me, but the girl's eyes didn't look right. I realized that later, after my brain sorted through what it saw. She didn't squint in the sun. She didn't track my movement when I stopped. Her head turned toward me, but her eyes, I don't know if she blinked at all. I stayed on the overpass longer than I should have, hoping to see someone walk out from behind a pylon or come up the access path. Nothing. A few cars flew by underneath, shaking the concrete just a little. After about 10 minutes, I finally got back on my bike and kept riding. But the sun still felt wrong. I kept glancing at my arms, expecting to see clouds blocking the light, but the sky stayed clear. The brightness never fully came back. It wasn't dim anymore, exactly. Just flat. Off. Like the contrast had been turned down a notch. About a mile later, I got the sense someone was behind me. Not close, not in a chasing way, but the same instinct you get when someone stares at the back of your head. I checked over my shoulder 3 times. Each time, the road was empty behind me. The long, straight stretch shimmering with heat. No cars, no cyclists. But the feeling stayed. It followed me all the way back to the trail entrance, and even after I'd loaded my bike into the back of my car, I kept scanning the area. The fields around the parking area were open and flat. If someone had been there, I would have seen them. On the drive home, I kept noticing faint flickers at the edges of my vision. Like something high above passed over the sun again, only too fast to catch. Every time I looked directly, the sky was blank. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the light looked normal again. Full brightness, normal contrast, trees casting sharp shadows, everything exactly as it should have been. I stayed in my car for a solid minute before getting out, not because I was scared exactly, just unsettled in a way I couldn't shake. Before going inside, I glanced up, just a quick habit-like look toward the sky. I didn't see anything, but the sunlight dimmed for the briefest moment. Just a half second, like something passed overhead again, quiet, controlled, too fast to see. I stepped inside and shut the door without looking up a second time,